I'd like to call this special meeting of the Great Island Advisory Committee to order on October 17th at 7:03. I have some brief remarks because we have a lot to cover and a lot more interesting people than me, but I did want to thank our community. We had a really, really strong showing for the survey, so thank you to everyone that participated. And also thank you to the committee members. I know you all reached out to your own organizations and circles that you're involved in, and that made a big difference. So we had, like I said, a terrific turnout. So those are my comments. Next up is public comment. So if you would like to speak, we would like you to sign in. Susan, do we have a sign in?
Here we are.
Okay, we have a sign in. So do we have anybody that would like to speak for public comment? Sure.
You might have signed in already.
Yep. Yeah, so if you could make sure your name and address is terrific, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name's Bill Van Loan, and I sent the committee a letter concerning the issue of dogs on Great Island, and I sent one also to the Board of Selectmen. And I'd like to go over a few of the points I made in this letter, not only for you and the public, but for the TV. I'm a longtime resident of Darien,
Just this way,
and I am opposed to dogs and pets in any manner being allowed on Great Island. Dogs and wildlife do not mix. Wildlife considers dogs predators. There are many people in Darien, for whatever reason, do not have a dog and wish to be able to walk where there are no dogs. Is there presently any Darien town property in comparable size and nature to Woodland Park or Highland Farm, Selleck's Woods, or Cherry Lawn, or the public schools and athletic fields where dogs are not allowed? The answer, I say, is no. Cove Island Park in Stanford allows dogs on a leash. Adjacent to Cove Island Park is the Cove Island Wildlife Sanctuary that does not allow dogs. So I say, why not no dogs on Great Island? Lastly, according to the town clerk's office in Darien, there are 2,580 dogs that have a license. According to the Darien Register of Voters office, there are about 13,000 registered voters. To me, this would mean roughly that there are 5,000 voters that have a dog and 8,000 voters that do not have a dog. Should not the voters who do not want dogs on Great Island also have as much or more say in this issue? That's for you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, seeing none?
You want to ask if anybody else?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Charlotte Little, and I live at Tenor Crest. And I'm here to pledge my support for allowing residents to bring their best friends to Great Island, their dogs. The recent survey that was collected had only one direct question about the use of our parks pertaining to dogs. Maybe the thought was that people can just write in the comments about dogs, but I feel that was short-sighted. In particular, there was one question where dogs should have been mentioned, they weren't. And it was in the multiple choice answers given to the following question. What are the primary reasons you go to a public open space, select all that apply. Here were 5 choices given to the question: to exercise or be physically active, to be with family or friends, to be closer to nature, to experience excitement, adventure, and to learn a skill or take a class. But glaringly omitted from these choices was this one: to be with my dog. Now, even the answer could be considered narrow from a dog owner's perspective. Some dog owners go to public spaces to walk their dog, but others go for the purpose of socializing their dog. Some go to the parks to tire out their dogs by throwing a ball for their retriever over and over and over again, so that he will take a nice long nap at home instead of barking in their backyard, annoying their neighborhood, and we should all thank them. Some dog owners go to the parks to meet with their friends, and their dog is the instrument for getting them there. Anyone who has witnessed Cherry Lawn at 7:30 in the morning knows that it's not just a place to walk a dog. It is social hour. What a wonderful way to meet other members of my community. I have met people I would not typically associate with. I have conversations with people whose children aren't the same ages as mine. And it is so nice to have a place to organically meet and talk to fellow residents. And it is due to what we have in common: our dogs. So back to the survey. When I answered the question, what are the primary reasons you go to a public open space, I did select all that apply. To exercise and be physically active with my dog. To be with family and friends with my dog. To be closer to nature with my dog. To experience excitement and adventure with my dog. And even to learn a skill or take an obedience class with my dog. Residents in Darien that have dogs use our parks regularly, and we want to use all of the parks with our dogs, including Great Island. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Avery Little. I live at 10 Oak Crest and I'm in the 9th grade. I hear that one of the reasons against allowing dogs at Great Island is that some people don't clean up after their dogs, but I don't think that's a reason to disallow dogs. As an active Girl Scout in this community since kindergarten, I love our parks. My troop has made a scavenger hunt at Selleck's Woods, created a story walk at Woodland Park, planted flowers at Tilly Pond, and participated in beach cleanups at Weed Beach, among other things. We are an active troop that cares about our parks and public spaces. But let's face it, some people don't care as much or don't think the rules apply to them. For instance, when a school bus stops and kids get out, some drivers don't stop per law, but we still allow all people to drive. We see trash left at our parks. Some kids don't throw away their litter, but we still allow all kids to use the playgrounds we built for them. And unfortunately, there is evidence that some people don't pick up their dog waste, but we should not ban all dogs due to a small minority. I believe that most dog owners in this town are like me, good, responsible people who care about our parks. And if some people who aren't it would be ashamed to punish if some people aren't it would be a shame to punish the rest of us, especially our dogs. I look forward to walking with my dog at Great Island, and I know that she and I would both love having a new park to use together. And my Girl Scout troop looks forward to contributing towards its success. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else for public comment?
Hi. My name is Astrid Peters and I live at 36 Ridge Acres Road in Darien. And I was born and raised in Darien, and I've always loved the view of Great Island from Long Neck Point Road. I applaud the town's decision to purchase Great Island property, and I appreciate the responsibility that the committee is tasked with to determine how to best proceed with the jewel that is Great Island. Properties such as Great Island are extremely rare and unique and need to be preserved. The access to Long Island Sound and the historical significance of the property warrants a methodical approach. There are no other places like Great Island because most have been swallowed by development. Darien is so fortunate to have this treasure, but with that fortune comes the responsibility to protect and preserve it. My hope is that the town will proceed judiciously and ideally keep Great Island open for pedestrians and passive recreation. Darien has so many beautiful parks and beaches that offer playgrounds, sports fields, paddle and pickleball and tennis courts. Darien has a boat club, an ice hockey rink, a great YMCA, multiple country clubs, beach clubs, with Chelsea Piers, Sono Sports House, twin rinks, etc. as nearby additional athletic resources. It would be ideal if Great Island could be enjoyed as a sanctuary. I hope that in time, the beautiful historical buildings at Great Island can be restored by preservation architects who know how to preserve interiors. Darien might seek private donations to fund these efforts. These buildings might be used for educational purposes or art shows or lectures. Given the history of Great Island, I would support keeping the beautiful stables and horses with a manager. An active stable is a potential revenue stream for Great Island and would continue the Great Island tradition of having horses. With the Great Island project, I think the town has a terrific opportunity to be exceptional environmental and preservation stewards. We can make history as a town that took the more challenging path by not overdeveloping a property that cannot be replicated, allowing our children and grandchildren the fleeting opportunity to enjoy our rare green space.
Anybody else in the audience? No? Susan, do we have any?
If anybody, or we can tell them if they would like to respond online, to use their reactions to raise their hand, and I can unmute them.
Okay. If anybody would like to respond that's online, use the
The
reactions.
reactions code to raise your hand.
The reactions code to raise your arm. Here, you raise your hand online.
I'm not seeing anything.
No? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is a report from Public Works. And we have Director of Public Works Ed Gentile with us tonight.
Keep it brief. Just want to touch on some things that we've been able to move forward on. The soil remediation on the island has begun this week, as well as those are spot locations, as well as the work in the orchard. The asbestos removal at house number 18, the pink house, has been completed. Next month in November, we will tackle the asbestos issue at the stables in the basement. We are winterizing, or starting to winterize all the facilities that are under our care right now, and we have, I didn't realize this, we have 6 locations that we take care of now with the oil burners, so we're going to have a full week next week of servicing them all and getting them prepped for the winter. We did do a quick call before you dig and mark out for utilities out on the island, and part of that process after marking it out is we've brought in a company to update our mapping so that we now have a full map with utilities as we find them. This is a good thing to do as you're continuing to work on the island as we move forward with planning on what we're going to use the island for. There was also a list of site improvements that were necessary to be taken care of as you folks decide to open up other areas on the site. Was asked just to touch on a couple, let you know how we're doing. Around the mansion or main house, we did go after all of those, what were described as woodchuck holes. They're a little bigger than that. But we continue to find more, and we continue to fill them in. I removed a lot of the old stumps we started this week. We're out there on site today. Finished removing the irrigation and walls around the old tennis court. So we're trying to actually make the surface area of the grass a whole lot safer to walk around in, so you can open that up. We did go after those oil fills. We're going to do something a little bit different too, but we did mark them out so they're a little bit more visible. Thinking about putting something around it so that you can't go near them, but they'll still be visible. And then finally, the security cameras around the island have been moved and updated to locations that were requested. Final item, beach house. We did clean up around the barbecue and around the back of the house, so it looks like we're getting ready for you folks. Any questions?
I have one. So John and Susan and Jen and I were out there today, and Dan mentioned it, but over by the carriage house, there's a sidewalk that goes to the like the amphitheater,
Mhm.
and there's a pretty big slab that's popped up and has moss on it.
Okay.
So the idea was, could you take that out and just put some asphalt just to continue that sidewalk?
Sure.
I actually think you can probably dig it out and put that slab back in. It's
Yeah.
it's a hole, it's not cracked or anything.
How big is the slab?
Very big.
You'd need a piece of equipment to lift it. for sure.
Probably half the
And
size of this
reset it?
table.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
you'd have to put some straps around it and lift it.
Got it.
Are you going to do more to block off those stairs? Because some of the work that Jeff and I have been doing around the signage talks about the blockage has to, like we've got like the sawhorse, not the sawhorses now, but they're not fixed, that we really need more fixed way to block those because there's no railings or
Are
whatever.
we talking about the staircase at the amphitheater area? That looks like-
Both that one and then down in the beach
Down at the
areas
beach
as
house.
well.
I don't think that one needs blocking.
Yeah,
The-
Which one?
The one at the carriage house to the left, where the amphitheater is.
Based on our research, I believe it does, because it doesn't have railings.
Doesn't need railings, because there's no more than 3 steps. If you need 4 steps to have to require a
We
railing.
better check that then.
Well,
That's a
regardless of whichever way it goes, if you don't need them, then that's fine. But if you do need them, there were railings there at one point, and you can see where the holes have been drilled.
Sure.
And there's actually some, like, they just like sawzalled them off. So you could probably get them out, but the stone is drilled. So you can see the cadence
Yes.
of where they were, and it could be replaced. But I think, like what Dan's saying, because when we walked it together, I brought that up, and he said, it goes 1, 2, flat, 1, 2, flat, 1, 2, flat. And so Dan's concept was, to the letter of the law, I don't think you are required to have a railing.
It's actually
there.
building code required.
building code,
It's not
sorry, yeah.
required.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the feeling today, that those
Okay.
stairs were okay.
Those are okay? Okay.
Slab?
Not the slab, the slab's not.
The slab needs
Slab's
some
what I
work.
take care of.
Yeah.
Slab, yeah, slab
Or
has to be-
reset it, is what I would say.
It's actually natural stone, it's not a slab, I don't think. Was it poured, or
The
is it a
asphalt would
slab?
look ugly there.
Is it a stone, or is it a?
It
Is
could
it
be, it could be
concrete?
concrete with exposed stone in it.
I will do my
It's
best
big.
to reset it.
It's a good 8 feet
You guys have a
long
lot of
by
faith
3
in me.
feet wide.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Your truck.
Anything else? Anything else for Ed? No? Okay, thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Yeah, big thank you. I know it's easy for us to come up with.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But
Thank
you guys
you.
do all the work, so thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next we have Reed Hildebrand, and, what's that? Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good to be back. And I'm really excited to have with me today 2 of our team members to help talk a little bit more about some of what we've been thinking about and learning related to ecology and also sort of governance and not quite revenue yet, but I think some of the setup in terms of how we respond to what we're learning from the community and the programs that seem really appealing to people and what that might mean for governance choices. So I think I'm Becca Sturgis. Am I ready to go? Okay, great. And I hope this works well. Let's see. Looks like it's taking a moment, but give it a moment. Long moment. I wonder.
Double click.
Maybe I don't have home.
Bruce?
I know, I was going to say Bruce too.
I don't know. I mean,
I might need to.
it's. Do you share on that machine a lot?
I do, but I haven't shared. Normally, I've been hooked up directly here. Let's try
Because
it again.
Apple has all those security features about your microphone and your,
Look,
good, good.
you just needed to start talking and it'll all come right. Thank you for that. So I think I'm going to keep the screen like this and advance like this. So we are very excited to be here tonight. We have a lot to cover, and the purpose of tonight is really an update to share with you where we are in progress. We have generated an enormous amount of feedback from the community, which we are so grateful for and incredibly impressed by. I'm going to look at the actual stat for the number of survey respondents, but the number of people who responded to the general survey is 2,370 before it closed, which I have to say, of the projects we've participated in, is the highest percentage of participation from a community. So it's, to me, very consistent with what the reputation of Darien is, which is a very participatory, involved community that really cares about its future. That is incredibly exciting. We just closed the survey, as you guys know, earlier this week, so we're in the process of assessing that information, but we're going to preview some of the findings. But we're going through it, and we'll have a more careful and full report, much of which will shape what we share back to the community on the November meeting that we're hosting. So with that, let me get going through here. Our speakers tonight are me, Rebecca Sturgis from Retail to Brand, Josh Wilson from Biohabitats, who's, I think, seated behind me. Thank you for raising your hand. And Ben Margolis from James Lehman Planning and Development. And because we have so much we're excited to share, we're going to go through this material pretty quickly. There'll be some time, I think, for conversation after we complete all of this. For media, there have been a number of conversations that we've had together about the website, which is launched and getting some traffic. I think I wanted, Bruce, if you could just speak about how we're addressing the concern that you had raised about it becoming a government website. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I spoke with Sophie from Reed, and she's great, and Jeff Adams here from Town of Darien. They're working together. I don't know if it's complete yet, but they were going to speak again today. The concept really is just that, for the official nature of the site and the, authentication that people understand that this is part of the Town of Darien, that the URL for the site should really just be greatisland.darienct.gov. It's easy to do that. It's also less cost because we don't pay anything additional for domain leases or SSL security certificates. That can all fall under the umbrella of the Town of Darien, so which we already have paid for, and it's a fixed cost. So that's in the works and should be completed, if not completed already. And there won't be any change. Like, we already have leased the domains that we have, like greatislandct.com. So that's just going to be forwarded until the end of the lease, and then so nobody's really going to have to worry about it. Most people probably just going to type in Great Island Darien to the search bar at the top, and their preferred search engine's just going to deliver a top relevant link that's going to take them right to the site. So I think we should be good.
There should be no change to user experience,
seamless.
basically.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of getting ahead of what the public future, that is where we are. So thank you for helping with that. Our whole team is appreciative and grateful.
Well, that's the thing that's been happening, right, with non-password protected meetings that get hijacked.
So will this not?
That's been kind of a common I don't think that's like us unique thing. It's kind of a...
Where we had all this wonderful feedback, and which we're still processing. So I do want to say that the sort of completely comprehensive assessment will come later. There are a couple of findings in terms of some of the questions that we did want to bring forward today. I think there was a lot of an unsurprising amount of enthusiasm about talking about accessibility and including parking, good hours, the paths, and making sure that they work for people of all sort of levels of mobility. Those are some of the things that came forward as very, very important. I will take as noted that we didn't, this survey is general, so very specific detailed questions, like it's very clear for the next survey that we want to ask more pointed questions about dogs because there's enormous interest and also like bikes in the community about getting more nuance about some of that. So, but at a high level, this is what we've heard about that. I think enormous excitement about the beauty of the island and the architecture and the approach to preservation there, and making sure that we continue to help everyone connect to nature. So again, it's not really a surprise, but it was kind of ratification of some of those early opinions that were shared in the town meeting. Some of the things that came forward, which you guys are already have on the agenda, already for later tonight, making sure that there's trash, really interested in getting public restrooms there, some interest in playgrounds, a little bit in event spaces. It was interesting to us that things like the community pool or some of those much more active, larger projects didn't get a huge amount of endorsement. We thought we would do an initial word cloud just to share what some of the words that came forward were. I think beautiful was by far the most popular word, and peaceful, historic, also words like expensive, maybe also not a surprise.
Becca, one question on that. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
Question
yeah,
at
no.
the end? Is this all the words, or these are the?
This is not all the words, and that's why I think we wanted to be able to share it in an early format in a way that is kind of able to be understood. This is not 100% comprehensive. We will be sharing with the committee basically all the data. We'll just protect everyone's privacy before we release it to you. So that will be coming, I think, probably in around 10 days.
Were the surveys were anonymous, right?
They're not anonymous.
They're not anonymous.
No. But I think in terms of, from it is, before we release them, so we're keeping them basically in a lockbox. So before we share out any information, we want them to be anonymous. So the information and the feedback will be available to you all, but the
platform that you use to collect allows that, right?
Yes,
You can
yes,
just say,
yes.
So then the names will be redacted, but we'll have the full
You'll have
raw
the
data.
full, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
good.
And I assume that the size of the font and the boldness indicates a frequency? and
Yes.
The more
Dan,
faded
thank
it
you. Yes.
is the fewer
Yeah.
times it was
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yes. But again, this is not meant to
It's not a complete
it's not
population.
a complete, right. So this is initial and it is representative, but it's not maybe statistically 100%, as close as we could possibly get it. I think what's basically in some ways useful though is that much of what's here is what you would expect and maybe even hope. We did want to kind of have context about what people are understanding as the places that they mostly go to, so they're sort of their own benchmarks for what is possible at Great Island. And again, we'll share this. I'm going to move quickly because we have 64 slides to get through and we're not the only remaining part of your agenda. I think we were a little bit surprised, but not upon reflection, about actually what a high number of people are coming by foot in a typical way. And I think you could say that just making sure as we go forward that the pedestrian accommodations are taken very seriously. There is real demand for, I think, continuing demand for being able to get onto the island on foot. We imagine that many, many more people will come by car or other, means of vehicle when they become, when that becomes easier. Also, I think we were interested in how many people are actually already coming by boat too, or have come by boat.
Sorry, is
Yeah.
this, you?
I was going to ask a question
About
about
the map.
those percentages.
Yeah, so I think we didn't make people, I had the same when I first reviewed
Okay.
this. We didn't make people choose only one answer, and so that's why the numbers are the way they are. But again, this is preliminary, and we'll have more sort of explanation of that.
And this is in response to existing spaces, not how they would get to.
Exactly,
Got it.
exactly.
But that second one there is that 96% of respondents said that they access the places listed in the question via car, at least at some points.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. And I mean, I think you are a car-centric community, and so we know making sure that there's a kind of straightforward way to come by car is an important thing for us to consider. At the same time, in the responses, which we're still processing, there is maybe more openness to people having other ways to get to the island than car, because I think people recognize that the impact of a really giant parking lot is not in the interest of the community or Great Island. We were also interested in sort of duration that people feel is okay in terms of how long it takes them to get to a public space on foot. And there's a surprising diversity of responses there. Again, here the percentages don't add up because, again, you didn't have to choose just one. But, in general, people are interested in or do come on their own or with family or with their dog. And yes, surprisingly, the spouse option got pretty low representation here. We don't know, again, that's what I'm saying, maybe that's an error, I'm not, maybe family.
It might be family.
Yeah.
It's, synonymous in a way.
Yeah. Maybe our categorization there was questionable. Anyway. So what are the primary reasons you go to a public space? Again, a lot of interest in being active, being closer to nature. I think we thought it was interesting that sort of the cultural reasons were not actually as exciting to people, or they didn't come forward quite as much as we were expecting. And so then in terms of activities, again, this is high level. I think there is a fair amount of interest in things that are more occasional, right? So things like holiday events or specific festivals or performances. And I think we thought that that was pretty interesting too. There wasn't a huge outpouring of sort of, we want a museum of X or we want this. It's much more like things that could be occasional. And so it seems possible as we start to think about the specific vision that allowing for exciting community events that happen with some frequency, but really bringing forward nature and passive activities and boat activities. Those seem to be some of the things. Making sure that there are bathrooms that there's enormous demand for. And then so just in terms of programs that people are particularly interested in, which this is what I was just hinting at, a lot of endorsement of passive use, recreational use, but then when we started to dig in, and we'll keep digging into exactly what kind of recreational activities people are interested in, it is things like kayaking or walking, bird watching, some of the things that are a little bit less intensive in terms of the kinds of infrastructure that are required. I think the relationship between some of the things that fall in the middle here, like education and civic or history and culture, there is a fair amount of interest in that, but really the dominant interest is in recreation of one kind or another. And then this is, again, initial, and there's a lot more work to be done, I think, on the dog question, but because it is, I think, a exciting topic for the community, we did want to bring forward in the limited way that our survey brought forward some comments on dogs. We just thought we would share those with you here. Again, it wasn't a major focus of this survey, so I don't think we can take this as terribly authoritative. I do think it represents the fact that there are people on the yes dog side and there are people on the no dog side. And so that, to the extent that I'm comfortable drawing any kind of conclusion, I think the sense that this is something that the community cares a lot about, but that there's a broad diversity of positions about it, did come forward even though we didn't target it as a question.
Well, I just have to ask a question though about that. I mean, how can you draw any conclusion about the favorability or unfavorability of dogs when it's not tested.
We can. I said to the extent that we can, to the extent that you can see anything in this, it's not like there's no one who, it's not like every single person who responded or said anything was all pro-dog. I think the sense is that like, which I think we saw in our public comment today, like there are people who have a desire to have dogs and there are people who don't. And that's about all because we didn't make this survey about that question. We can say.
But to be clear,
yeah,
in every venue available to date, the overwhelming amount of people who have either written us, called us, stopped us on the street, want dogs on that island.
So, but I guess from a Reed Hildebrand point of view, from my point of view, because we have not pulled that directly, but we will in our next survey, that is not the representation we have yet. So yeah, I think that's all I can say. So
I agree. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think, yes, it didn't specifically ask about dogs there. In our last meeting, we happened to have a pretty lengthy conversation about dogs, and then we said, you know, over the microphones and to the people that were here, said, hey, please weigh in and let us know how you're feeling about dogs. So I think like what we've received in the Great Island Advisory Committee inbox in the last 3 weeks, plus anecdotally just meeting someone at the coffee shop or running into them around town. I know I've heard from a lot of people since that last meeting, as you guys probably have too, but I think we probably in that data set have more experience. And I think the most interesting part about it is that most of the people who don't want dogs say that they don't have anything really against the dogs or the people with the dogs. It's just that they want the dog on the leash so that they don't get, you know, so it's, I think it's, you know, we're going to talk about that later, but anyway.
Yeah, we will talk about it more, and I think that, I guess, my particular position about these things is I would like to see us get through the vision and complete this outreach and set of findings that we have underway before there is a determination, but we'll come back.
Well, I mean, I'll just have to stop you though right there. I mean, at the Board of Selectmen level, in this committee level, we're talking about this tonight. We're voting on dogs later in this agenda tonight, and the notion of waiting for a direct survey on that issue is, well, I mean, we're a committee of 9, but it's going nowhere with me. We've been talking about this for a while. We're going to vote on this tonight.
I think that I'm sharing my professional opinion, Mike, and I feel like there is, and we're going to share more evidence about other parks and benchmarks and what they do and how they think about it, and we also are going to share our current ecological understanding this evening. So I just shared my position, which would be to wait, but I know it is on your agenda to vote on it.
Can I make one comment? I'm sorry, I know we're tight on time, but I'm just curious what the question will be that you're voting on, because if it's a binary yes or no, that at this point might not be enough information, right? Is it, you know, eventually you could think about places where there's access for X and there's access for Y. But at this point, what are you voting on? I'm just curious.
So there was a provision in the access rules that we discussed last time that allowed for dogs to be on the island on the leash. At this committee meeting, we voted to withdraw that proposed change on the notion that we wanted to see this survey, speak about this, but then to vote at our next meeting after this presentation, when those regulations were reviewed at the Board of Selectmen level, which ultimately will make that decision. The feeling of that board was, you know, frankly, incredulous that dogs weren't really allowed on the island yet, and that we're going to move on this issue with dispatch as opposed to delay. So what we would be talking about later tonight is the reinsertion or amendment to the regulations to allow for dogs on a leash on that island.
Well, Mike, I think you might be getting a little bit ahead. So we're going to have a discussion about this, and hopefully we'll take action. But the action could be that we're not taking action. So let's not, I know you don't agree with that position, but we're a committee, and we're going to act as a committee, and we're going to discuss it and come to a decision tonight, which might not even be making a decision tonight. So let's just hear the whole
Right,
presentation.
and we left it last time that we at your council was, let's let it breathe, right? Because we said, we've been talking about this, but we haven't specifically brought it as a bullet point in our meeting to the residents of this community to say, hey, I think we should change rule number 5 of the Great Island Access rules to flip it and say, hey, we're getting to the quiet time of the year for the use of the island. We aren't really going to know about how dog use works until we try it. So while we're still in the process of figuring out the master plan, we want to try different things. And, to what Ben just said, a binary decision, we don't have enough data on pretty much anything that we're doing as far as opening it up for picnics, opening it up for, photographs, walking here, walking there. So from a binary, it's all shades of gray. I mean, we don't really have binary on a whole lot. So I think that we may not get it exactly right the first time, but we have to try stuff. And I think that's all we
suggest we continue with the agenda.
Yes.
We'll discuss this
Yes.
topic and allow Becca
Okay.
to complete.
Go ahead,
Thank
Becca. Sorry.
So in terms of what people are envisioning for Great Island, there was very strong support for the idea of some level of nature preserve. There's more detail on all of this. Again, a lot of positive endorsement for passive recreation. Many people giving voice pro and also with some reservation to the idea of community gatherings or events. And I think just this idea that there's a lot of caution around larger scale investment into things like swimming pools or sports fields. So that was interesting. Nervousness about the costs of the island and the ongoing operation, and a lot of questions about where the revenue is going to come from and the amount that's already been invested. So in terms of the workshop, we have talked about this a bit before, but tremendous amount of enthusiasm and feedback. I think a lot of curiosity about what was there and what might be possible. I think we thought today we just hit high level some of the feedback from the focus groups. We're only about halfway through with them. They've been incredibly well attended and incredibly constructive. Some of the things just to highlight from the ecology group, a lot of sort of testimony about the resource sensitivity, a lot of interest in really taking a long-term planning view, trying to understand broader conservation goals, questions about the governance related to conservation and the island, and a sort of plea that there be deep listening to the community. There's more there. I think, a lot of openness to possible partnerships with some of your organizations that are already in town. The education session was really exciting and super well attended, even though it was late on a Friday. I think the sense that the island is basically a perfect platform for educational experiences, and particularly for experiential learning, which is something I think Darien is invested in, but doesn't maybe have as much on offer as it would like to have within the district. There was even the idea that perhaps a lot of several of the historic buildings become part of the public school system and house specific programs related to nature and conservation, ecology, science, and research. A question of whether or not there could be a living lab part of the public school system. So there were some, I think, really fantastic ideas that came from your educators in the public school system. So it feels like that's avenue really for further exploration and partnership, and could make a lot of sense of these amazing buildings that are part of the fabric there. And the idea that the students themselves could become stewards. Something that one of the teachers said is that there's so much ecology here in Darien, but a lot of people have grown up with it, but they don't know how to understand it or perceive it, and the island is a great place for that. Very different kind of tenor meeting on transportation. Craig was there too, but also pretty animated with, I think, a lot of generous participation. I think, as you might expect, some of the folks who are tasked with the safety of the citizenry have a set of concerns about the current infrastructure and the ability to take care of people or address safety issues if anything happens on the island. And so questions around road width, the water infrastructure, what level of hydrants and fire safety or sort of EMT provision we would be putting in place. And then issues around some of the coastal things came forward. I think everybody is extremely open and excited about how these things get developed. It's clear to me that we have a little bit more of a puzzle than maybe we had thought about understanding what exactly needs to happen to get even the temporary parking in place. And so the fact that there may be a little bit, we'll come to that in a moment, but that there might be a little bit more time related to that is probably quite useful. So we'll return to that. But that was something that came up a bunch there. Related to things that have to do with the immediate vision and plan for the island, we're going to talk about access, temporary parking, which I've just forecast, a little touch on where the architecture understanding is, and then hopefully a little bit of a longer conversation on both ecology and governance and revenue. So related to access, we've shown you guys this slide before. I think, the narrow way onto the island, the limits with the one-way easement down to the boathouse, these are pretty important as we think about access going forward. I think, too, one of the things that I didn't just foreground in the survey is many of the folks in town are concerned that we're really thinking about flooding and the sort of future of sea level conditions in how we make investments in the island. And so that's something that came up again and again and that we're going to dig into. But this map gets at some of that. I think this is the drawing about sort of, this goal to really be opening up the island that we shared last time in terms of the main areas that are paved and, basically very close to being ready, as Ed was saying, for people to enjoy. I think we did want to share, because this question of exactly how you arrive at a dog policy is a great moment for you as a community. Some of the parallels, particularly in national parks and Connecticut shoreline parks, that sort of set standards related to dogs. Sorry to make you squint. I think a couple of the sort of standard rules that we thought we would just share, because I think in whatever the policy is, we would imagine that we would want to have best practice and sort of use the standard categories. So leashes, often leashes have a specific length that's actually mandated, 6 or 7 feet. This, need, as we already heard, to make sure that everyone picks up after their dog, if we do allow dogs, and that there are waste trash receptacles in reasonable cadence. I think one of the things that was of interest is that, particularly actually in the state of Connecticut, there are many coastal parks that do not allow any dog access any time of the year. So that's 11 parks. Off-season access is allowed at 11 parks. And then restricted year-round access, which is limited to certain areas, there are 6 parks that allow that. And that is, I think, more the kind of condition that you guys are currently have on the table for yourselves tonight. And then actually the only 6 parks allows year-round access.
Out of how many, Becca?
I'd have to do the math, 22, 27, 33, I think if my math is right. So I think we did just, in the bold letters here, those are the sort of standard provisions, and so in terms of writing a policy, that's what we wanted to bring forward. We did think it was important to this sort of finding that actually there is deep precedent in the state for having limits on dogs. Turning over to temporary parking, we had shared schemes in our last meeting with you all, and you had shared the feedback that ideally it would be a one-way loop, and that we would keep it, if we could, away from the stone buildings, that it would be discreet or inconspicuous, and as close to the entry as possible. I think all of that made sense to us. I think the one thing in terms of reconsidering the location that came forward when we were talking in the transportation session is that basically your town servants really feel that if we're going to have parking and we're going to be increasing access, they need to have a sense that they can responsibly handle any emergency, and having two-way access, which is something you all have talked about, is the preferred condition for that. So we have, and I know I shared some of this with you, but so we drew the preferred option. We've looked at it. I think there is a logic here, but the risk to it is one that was given voice from your public safety officials, that because it's one way, if any obstruction is in the roadway, it's potentially a big challenge. So then two other options that we thought.
Can I ask a question about that? Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, so I think if we, my high level take from this is that given the desire to move ahead with this quickly, which I think is deeply felt in the community, I think we would like to sit down and have a very serious set of conversations about how to work to make sure that there's comfort with the folks who are tasked by the town to take care of everyone. The initial sense is that this one-way loop is pretty problematic.
I think I would disagree with that. I'd like to get involved in that conversation because the way that you come up the main drag to get to the parking lot that you first proposed between the greenhouse and the stable, so that's problematic, I believe, in many ways because it's the main thoroughfare where there's walkers and everybody else. Now you're going to introduce cars going in two directions in addition to those walkers. So let's assume we've got 23A completed, and if you have the one-way access up to the boathouse and then you have the egress coming from the greenhouse down the main thoroughfare in one way, if there was a problem, and let's say going to that location where you've drawn it between the greenhouse and the stables, let's say there was a car on fire on the hill, on the two-way, okay? You're completely blocked getting there. You could still get around by the greenhouse, by the boathouse, work your way around. If you have the two-way loop and there's a car on fire on the causeway on the way up to the parking lot, but you have a medical emergency, you can come up the main thoroughfare and go the wrong way on the one-way road with lights and sirens like they do in New York City every day. And if there was a blockage on 23A, you would come in Great Island Road. If there was a blockage on Great Island Road, you'd come in through 23A. So I think you've got so much more optionality with the loop.
I guess my feeling, so we are showing two alternatives on screen right now. I think my feeling is that if this is as pressing for the community as it is, I think that there is a sort of rapid design phase that should happen because I think you want the confidence of everyone who's charged with the community before you take action, and I advise you to take action. So I don't think that we should get into, I think a lot of your instincts about this make a lot of sense. I guess what we wanted to bring forward to you is that the simple solution that I think there was a lot of interest in has some real challenges, and so I don't think we want to solve the design solution here around the table today, but I think we could do a kind of rapid process to get buy-in and make sure that we have the infrastructure and provisions that are necessary to give everyone confidence. And I think there are places to get the 30 to 36 spaces that seem about right. So,
Okay, so
And I think you want to keep the cars off the island and as least visible as possible. And I've been the most vocal about parking and temporary parking and trying to push this forward. And these drawings are appearing, and nobody has called me or sent me an email and asked for any of my input outside of this meeting. So I'm just a little surprised, and you know, that I'm finding out that this was weighed in by safety services and things like that. I don't know anything about it.
It hasn't been. What I'm merely saying that we did have the focus group conversation, and there were a set of issues around the island that were brought forward. And so we respond, rather than coming to you with an option that didn't take into consideration that feedback, we wanted to bring forward options that also would accommodate that so that we can have a conversation. So we are not asking for an endorsement of any of these. It's more to say that actually, as we're doing the due diligence of having these conversations and talking deeply to the community, there are issues that are very serious that do need to be reconciled in the solutions that we move forward with. And so that's why it's not like, I'm not saying do this, I'm saying that to get deep buy-in, which I believe you want to have for the solution, there's a little bit more work, and there's probably a committee, there's a task force.
I hope so, because I think Jerry Marin would have a hard time believing that the crest of that hill by the greenhouse, where you come over, which is a complete sightline fiasco, that you're going to invite two-way traffic with strollers, walkers, kids driving too fast. It's a disaster.
Yeah, but I think Bruce, the reason, I think the sort of finding that we're trying to bring forward is that there's actually a little bit more complexity to get the right answer here than I think everybody was maybe initially hoping. And so we can talk about what the next steps are for that, but I think that it needs to be done with study and involvement from all the right people.
Thank you.
So in terms of architecture, there's a lot of work being done on the architecture right now, and just very high level, there's been tremendous set of findings and research related to the history of the island, great resource from Sarah Kina, the town historian. Also, the survey of existing conditions is wrapping up, and our facilities assessment is well underway. Some of the very cool things, just to share with you, we have an amazing model where you can zoom in and you can turn it all around and get to any part from your computer now of the island, as well as really detailed existing conditions drawings, which should allow us to make much more informed decisions about the future and the conditions of these buildings. I am now going to invite Josh to come forward and sit at the table and talk about the ecology slides and where we are with that. Yep, maybe bring and share.
Can you slide down?
Yeah, do you mind squishing down a little?
This place ready for bed. This spot ready for bed here. Hi, Josh Wilson with Biohabitats. Good to see you all again. And I wanted to, so we've been as busy as we can be out at the site and investigating sort of the ecology of the site. And what we're presenting you today is sort of our first assessment of the site. Been out to the site only a handful of times right now, so it's not a complete ecological assessment. I mean, a complete ecological assessment would require seasonal visits to the island, understanding. What we have been able to do is gather what we've been able to observe, but then also some information that's publicly available, resources, whether it's local state data or iNaturalist, where people have citizen scientists enter their own data of observations of species that are on the island, et cetera. So when we do this type of work, we look at these projects not just on a site basis, but for the whole ecology of the landscape. We look at how does Great Island fit in the context of not just, not Long Island Sound as a whole necessarily, but its region of Long Island Sound and where we are, close to New York City, western side of Long Island Sound, et cetera. So really we're looking at that and how it fits into the patterns and processes on the larger landscape as well. We do look at the sort of migratory patterns and such as we go look at other information. So for example, we consider the coastal Atlantic Flyway, right? Great Island is one of the many islands and shoreline areas where you see a lot of migration of bird species, both in the spring and in the fall. This time of year, in fact, it should be very active, especially in the early mornings and then at dusk as well as into overnight with a lot of bird migration. Places like, I don't know if everybody knows, but places like in New Haven where they have hawk watches. I'm sure there's plenty of hawks flying overhead on Great Island as well. So it's really, again, it's one of those situations where it's in a position that it's going to see a lot of migration. But we consider that Great Island in the context of that as well, to understand how it serves that migratory flyway, how it serves any type of other species that are there. Next slide. And if I'm talking fast, it's because I don't,
It's good. Talk fast.
They don't like you to talk too fast.
Okay. Too fast for the digital. So then we also look a little closer on the ecoregion. Obviously we're in the coastal Long Island Sound, coastal lowland area. A lot of geologic influence, glacial geologic influence on the Great Island. Largely that then informs the type of soil that are on the site, and that soil then informs the type of vegetation that we have on the site, and couple that with the maritime position of the island. So now we're dealing with salt air and shallow to till and bedrock type of areas. So we're looking at sort of what type of abiotic conditions that then feed into what are our biotic conditions. And so the next. We look at the land cover. This is actually a published land cover data for the state. The state does it roughly every 5 years. They do a new land cover map. They're working on it now. So this is from, I believe it was 2020 was the last one. But anyway, Darien as a whole is a lot like other towns in Connecticut, especially populated towns where land cover actually is, you have about 55% tree cover or canopy cover, and that's largely because you have well-developed canopies within your suburban neighborhoods. If you look at this particular map, you see that Stamford to the west is quite white, which is a lot of urban development, whereas Darien has a lot more green. That being said, the size of forest or woodland in Darien is pretty limited. What I'd say is very patchy. It's a lot of fragmentation, a lot of stuff going on there. A lot of.
I'm Siri.
Hi Siri. Public comment for Siri. And so I think what happens is there's a lot of fragmentation with all the roads and everything. So you end up with that large canopy cover, which is typical, which covers over half the town, but it's still in little patches. And so when we're looking at that, we're just looking at what availability in terms of habitat then is available in the town itself, but also on Great Island. And so if we go to the next slide. And so we start to look closely at the island itself. These species all come from iNaturalist. These are species that have been observed in that 1 mile radius of Great Island. So it's a lot of diversity of species, birds, mammals, fish aren't included, and other, but it's pretty more of your charismatic species, right? So things you see, they're not putting crayfish and stuff like that in here. But there's quite a few species, and there are actually a few listed species, including great egret, bald eagle, being not an endangered threatened, but it's a protected, nationally protected species, obviously. The northern parula. So there's other species that are, migratory species that are using the island or near the island. So the habitat is available to them. So this gets to our field observations. We spent time on the island in the spring, and then also in September, about a month ago, and really looking at the island. And what we're looking at is a little bit more detail than what the land cover mapping provides. We wanted to identify essentially ecological communities that exist on the island. what's there, what's available, and really giving you all a baseline, right? Because what this baseline of data allows you to do is then to make decisions, with us helping Hildebrand, and by extension, you all make sort of decisions on how you want to prioritize conservation on the island. And then, we can then help you direct what makes sense, what doesn't make sense in terms of protection. So really what we want to do is identify the different communities that are existing on the island. So in this case, we've identified 14 distinct communities across the island. The largest being what we're referring to as maritime woodland. We're not calling it forest because it's a forest. You usually think of quite a much larger tract of land. This is smaller, but still a compacted area of woodland in that area. But then the second probably largest is not on the island per se, or on the property per se, but really adjacent to the island of the salt marshes that are really there, and the tidal mudflats, which actually don't show up on the map because they're so extensive. I mean, it's so in the coves and the shallows, you have quite a bit of mudflats, which are really high quality habitat in those areas. So 14 different, everything from woodlands to manicured, managed grasslands, right? So lawns and gardens and that type of thing. But a wide range of different ecological habitats, which then serve a wide range of different species on the island. And so, speed through, I'm not going to talk about each of them because because I'm not 14 different habitats would be quite a while, and I don't think that's the nature of this meeting. So, as I talked about it, what we come to a conclusion about in this is that there's sort of three priorities that we see are important for the island. Conservation, restoration, and education are the three sort of conservation priorities on the island. And so the opportunity for conservation really comes down to taking what you have and maintaining it. Trying to maintain what you have, not disturb it, not fragment any of the woodlands or any of the habitats that are out there, communities that are out there, but really keep them as they are, allow them to develop into a more robust ecological systems. So things like the maritime woodland or any of the tidal wetlands that are actually on the site, conserving those areas. And then also working with the town as a whole to protect parts that are on adjacent to the island, the mudflats, the tidal mudflats, some of the tidal marshes, those types of areas. So really conserving those areas, focusing on a strategy that balances the human need with the conservation need on the island. The next is to restore. There are generally, the site itself, it's obviously it's a previously developed site, so there's plenty of anthropogenic human impacts on the island. But I think there are a lot of good features of the island that the trajectory, if left as it is, the trajectory would provide a lot of conservation opportunity and a lot of natural restoration or regeneration. That's not to say though that can't be a little nudge can't be helpful. Areas like the tidal wetlands, like the area between the causeway, there's that wetland area that's sort of between the causeway. It looks like it might have been a pasture at one time. I'm not sure the history of that, but reconnecting that to tidal flow, for example, and then allowing that to be a restored tidal marsh, or some of the hayfields and pastures areas that have maybe gone fallow and allowed to regenerate and grow. Those areas, those meadows provide great ground bird nesting habitat. In the spring, they provide great habitat for species like turkey and their poults to be able to find cover in those areas. So really restoring those areas to natural meadows. And so there's a certain degree of management with that. If you left it to go, you would all turn it to forest eventually, but managing that. And then across the entire island as a whole, all habitats, really invasive species management. There's plenty of invasive species to choose from and to have to manage on the island: Phragmites, swallowwort, Japanese barberry, multiple. I could list probably at least a dozen species minimum that can be managed on the island. So that's the restoration aspect. And then the last, education. So I think the benefit of the island is not the uniqueness of the island in the actual habitats, but how many communities, how many habitats you have in close proximity on this island. You go from mudflat, topographically from mudflat up to bedrock outcrop, maritime woodland. in a really short distance of area. So the opportunity to educate people on just the variety of 6 or 7 communities on that continuum really can be a real great benefit, not just to students, kids, but also to adults. So I think there's that opportunity. You also have several buildings on the site that are, I don't know what you want to do with them, but they could present an opportunity for educational classrooms and that type of nature center, or an extension of the Darien Nature Center, or something like that, where you're bringing that opportunity, from elsewhere in the town onto the island. And so I think that what it comes for, as we think about this, as ecologists, I joke and I say I don't care about people, I care about animals. So I think that what it comes down to is we think about the ecological factors in terms of what are the priorities that we want to protect, and in terms of assessing access. And those two ecological factors are the communities or the habitats, and then the second part are the populations or the species that are on the island. And then we also look at it from what are the disturbance factors, or disturbance activity factors that we would want to consider in allowing people to access, to the island in order to protect those ecological factors. And those, these are listing the number of people, the type of activity, how you're getting to the site, walking around a site or circulating, the amount of time, and the seasonality. So we can go to the next slide. So we talk about community. We're talking about, usually people think of habitats, but communities are more than that. Communities are, so the trees and the vegetation is like the habitat, but within those trees you then have the bugs and you have the birds and you have the mammals that use that. So that's really the community. You're looking at all species, all populations of animals in concert, and that's the community. And really when we talk about that, the factors that help us understand the robustness of that community is the type of community, the size, how it's connected to itself or other patches, but also other supporting communities. And that gets to transitions, and then also the general function. Usually when I refer to things, I refer to ecological functions, and humans have values. So ecology has specific needs, and then we put some value onto those things. So when I talk about it, I'll talk about often in function, so species diversity and richness in those communities. Actually go back, because I think with this table on the right, and this is in draft form, but as we're talking about it, it sort of shows the communities on Great Islands, and we qualitatively assess their relative robustness across it. So the green is high robustness. So you've got, maybe you have large size, and it's well connected, and it's also associated with other, transitions into another supporting area. Whereas the red is low, and that's an indication that it really doesn't provide a lot of ecological function. It's a very limited ecological function, whether that's because of its nature or because it's been disturbed and degraded in those areas. Okay.
Can you define connectivity?
So in connectivity, what we talk about would be sort of a linear, an undisturbed pathway between one and another. So in forest areas, connectivity would be an area that, where the forest, maybe it pinches to a narrow area, but it would be connected. Oftentimes we think of connectivity too as not having a hard barrier, like a road or something like that. So in some cases, if we're talking about vernal pools, for example, what we talk about in a vernal pool is we want connectivity so that movement of the species that depend upon the vernal pools isn't interrupted, and they're not cut off from the upland habitat, which actually I'll talk about in a minute here. So then population, that gets us sort of, connectivity gets us to the species and how species are able to exist on the island and use the communities that exist on those islands. And those we evaluate based upon their habitat type, the size, their sensitivity to, mostly to anthropogenic impacts or effects, whether it's light or noise, or just general presence, activity of people in an area. The period when they are most sensitive depending on different times of year, or their life processes from migration through breeding, through fledging young, and then obviously then connectivity to larger areas or contiguous areas that we have. The species shown there are representative. Again, they come from that previous slide and are some of the ones, but I wanted to talk about a handful of species that do or could exist on the site, given the type of communities and the habitats that are available. So yeah, next slide, please. So the first we'll talk about is bald eagle. So they're nesting bald eagle on the island, and what's important to understand about bald eagles is that they nest. They need very tall trees near water bodies for access. So the nests need really tall, strong trees to be able to build their nest. I don't know if you have all seen eagles' nests, but they're gigantic. I mean, they're like a small shed upside down in a tree, and so they need that area, but they also need an area protected of about 330 feet or 100 meters radius when they're breeding, because within that area, activity within that area that might disturb them could affect their ability to lay eggs, but not only lay eggs, but also want to stay on the eggs and incubate. And so they may fly away, in which case it risks the viability of the eggs. So what's shown in the top right corner is, it's kind of hard to see in the imagery maybe, but it's the 330 foot radius on a circle basically covers maritime, the large majority of that maritime woodland area in the northeast corner of the site. Northeast, right? I'm saying the direction. The northeast corner of the site. So to give you a sense of that's the impact. They're most susceptible between December and June. Around here, yeah, it's about that. It varies based on latitude, but essentially December to June is their most sensitive period, and within that it's even more tight when they're trying to incubate the eggs, and that's usually in the February to April time range. So there's a lot of sensitivity around them, and so you have to sort of be aware of that, and that's part of the consideration as you consider the ecology of the site. We'll go to the next slide.
How far does that extend? Is that for walking in that area?
So yes, there are circumstances where the state will close off 3 miles of trail, knowing that there's an eagle nest within somewhere along that trail, public trail, like a greenway or rail to trail. Then they'll close that off because between January and June is their usual window. So it can be that type of thing. The 330 distance is the minimum distance to avoid. The larger recommendation is 200 meters or 660 feet to avoid for maximum protection of eagles in an area. So a less protected species, but one that's close to my heart, the wood frog. So they use vernal pools. Not sure if that pool on the island is as a vernal pool or it's a potential vernal pool. It holds water. I don't know if it's deep enough, long enough for breeding amphibians. So we'd have to study it. For the sake of often when I'm working on other projects, we usually assume it's a vernal pool until it's confirmed that it's not. So let's just, for the sake of this, we have a vernal pool on the site, and a species like the wood frog. They require 100-foot envelope around the vernal pool itself for immediate breeding and migration, but they can travel as far as 750, 800 feet from any given pool, and where they basically through the summer and into the overwinter is where they reside. So that's really where their life is spent. They spend a very short amount of time in the vernal pool. But they spend most of their time in the upland area. So protecting that area around it is important to provide the protection for those
This
species.
is the area behind the carriage house?
So the vernal pool is,
I don't know where it is.
no, it's,
So I don't know if you can see the red
Yeah.
circle, so it's also in the maritime. It overlaps with the eagle circle, basically. So, I mean, I think the sense that one large patch of maritime woodland has enormous ecological value is getting reinforced by the findings.
Right. Another species, which is the great eager, which is a state-threatened species. They nest offshore on secluded islands. That's where their rookeries usually are, but they feed in tidal flats all over. In fact, I saw one today driving in, so and I'm sure you see them regularly too, driving around town. So really, their sensitivity is as a species is more associated with just general disturbance. People getting too close, moving around them, scaring them away, that type of thing. Because they're a state-threatened species and they nest off-site. The protection for breeding is a little bit stronger. But that being said, they require they need those habitats of the mudflats in those types of areas. So that's why it's important to continue to protect the mudflats or enhance the areas, those types of areas, or even the low marsh areas where small fish will often get into, and they'll feed on those. And then, they have more of a sensitivity period from April to June when they are breeding. And then laugh because everybody has ever seen the video of the woodcocks dancing to a funk music. It's great. Go to YouTube and check it out. But their woodcock is a really interesting species. It breeds between March and June, and in March and April time period when they're breeding, they're very active. They have a really interesting mating ritual, but they require a couple things. The males require an open space during that breeding period to do a very specific type of flight. But then when they actually breed, they breed in the woodland areas. This picture, you sort of see the camouflage of them is amazing. They are so protective of their nests that females will wait on their nests till you're literally on top of them before they fly away. So the risk of startling these types of birds, these ground nesting birds, is especially critical, and they're very sensitive to any activity that sort of can disturb their nest during that breeding period. So this is a situation where connectivity is important, where you do have fields and meadows in certain areas, but that are adjacent to those woodland areas. Again, other species.
Josh, I'm sorry. That was a protected species?
No, woodcock is not.
That's just an interesting one.
It's just an interesting one, and one that that sort of exemplifies how dynamic species can be and how they can spread across different types of habitats and community types.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we think about it, we think about then balancing this ecological function and programming by looking at sort of this tiered level of access. And we look at disturbance activity types. And this is really, there's a lot here. And I think it would take a little longer to talk about it. But essentially, it's about how many people are accessing a site, for how long during a day. Are they on trail? Are they off trail? Are they allowed to have dogs? Or are they not allowed to have dogs? So these types of things? Are they allowed to collect? Or are they not allowed to collect? What types of restrictions and activities, and what can happen? How can they affect the species and the communities that are in there? So, you go everything from no activity, activity, which I don't think anybody wants, but it's basically things where the communities and populations, only trained staff are allowed. You're only allowed by authorization or permit type of thing, and you're allowed to just preserve it as a complete nature preserve, right? And only limited access, which I don't think is the case. The other end of the extreme is parties on the lawn, right? And turning everything into fully active recreation, and I don't think that's where y'all want to go either. You're somewhere in between. So so really we're talking about allowing we're estimating based on solitary individuals, maybe walking on paths, for less than 4 hours a day type of thing. It's a very low impact type of thing, whereas higher impacts are larger groups on the island, and being, where there's more noise, there's more activity, because really the disturbance to these species happens because of light, noise, and presence. So those are the three things that are most affect the species that are on the island, and in the different communities. And then obviously there's our seasonal protection periods. And Becca sort of alluded to this in when she was talking about dogs on islands. There's sort of this period where nesting and breeding season is most active, usually between mid-March and the beginning of August. It varies based on species, but that's generally the high time of active nesting and breeding season. And then there's the off season or the migratory season that's outside of it, so September 1st to March 15th or March 14th. So, considering, we can have to consider that seasonality in that time period of when it makes sense to have people on-site or off-site, people, allowing people access, or, what kinds of access we're talking about. And the next. So I think that from the work that we've been doing, what we sort of see things in a short-term and a long-term approach. I think in the short term, and the really short term is, like I said at the outset, is we have a very little amount of data that we've started to gather here. We would need more to understand what exactly we're working with and what we're protecting. And then from that information, what are our priorities in protection, and how do we get there? So really the really short term, in the sort of the 1 year time period, is to try to identify or develop a conservation plan. Understand, again, what are the habitat areas, a little more detail on the habitat areas, the connections, what buffers are needed for those habitat areas. Are there priority species that, that aren't listed or haven't been identified necessarily on it? And then obviously working through some of the protection levels. And then within that developing a management plan, specifically a vegetation management plan, which talks about invasive species, but also tree management and other type of species through that. And then that means going in and conducting, would be conducting a complete flora and fauna survey over a course of a year. Preparing the invasive species management, evaluating the need for any wildlife management if there is any. For example, I know white-tailed deer, there are quite a few probably on the island, and how are they affecting the community? Are they over-browsing everything? Is it a problem? And then the last is sort of working in the short term is sort of getting education started. Getting people. The best thing you can do to educate people is to just educate on what you're doing for in the conservation effort. And it's, whether that's through interpretive signage or letters or, public outreach type of thing. And then the next is the long term, which is really implementing the conservation plan, identifying areas where restoration makes sense and can be implemented, identifying funding sources for those type of restoration activities, and then really developing a cohesive educational program on the island around the conservation. So that's the speed run through ecology.
You listed dog walking on leash as an extremely high impact. Can you elaborate on that?
So you go back. There's a variety, a range of what if you want to flip back a little bit. It's actually dog walking in general in natural spaces has been shown to adversely affect wildlife, and there's plenty of publications and data out there and reports and studies that have shown that certainly off leash is a lot worse. Off leash, dogs run wild, they chase animals, they scare them out. But even dogs on leash are the same as having humans, but also in an area, but also they do present an issue with scaring wildlife or dispersing wildlife away. So there is always that concern that dog walking, is it a wholly bad concern? Are they never going to come back? Well, it depends on how long you're walking dogs, how many dogs, what are you allowing, the number of people that are on there. So I think it's the kind of thing, the consideration that needs to be made. It's not just on leash or off leash, yes or no, is it good or bad? It's like I said, it's frequency and duration.
Is the same true of people?
Yeah, I would say it's the same for people. Right. So I think that the same is true for horses, right? I mean, there were horses walking around around there. I'm certain that the species population with horses and dogs and people constantly on there is different than it is now, when there's a lot fewer people. And so, but you don't know that. We don't know what's there either. We don't have a full inventory. We don't have a full understanding, and we want to be able to advise you in the right sort of way. So to do that, we need to sort of get that baseline data, get that baseline information preferably without it being disturbed, and get that information so and then you can prioritize. And if you can prioritize what that means to you and what that means to the community.
So are you recommending minimal traffic, whether human or dog? Wait, just let me finish.
Yep, no,
for an extended period of time, while you study potential impact?
No.
Okay, good.
But, no, but what I'm recommending is that, or suggesting, I'm not recommending at this point because I think I've been fully recommended, but I think what we've talked about and suggesting is that some areas, perhaps some areas require a little bit more protection and less traffic than other areas.
So that would be for humans and dogs. So you're thinking of areas that you would set aside and say, you know what, let's not have humans walk in these particular areas because the adverse impact on these animals would be high.
What I'm saying is that allowing humans to access areas and dogs and, is colors to what we observe out there. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying that I think the decision and the priorities need to be what areas need to be accessible versus what areas don't need to be, or what areas desire to be accessible versus not desire to be accessible. What areas are more sensitive, and what areas are moderately sensitive, and what areas are least sensitive. For example, I would say I would strongly recommend that you not have people accessing and walking on the salt marshes and in mudflat areas, that those areas should not be. And most people don't want to. I mean, I'm probably one of a very few number of people that actually like to go out there and walk on them. But they are minimizing that activity. But I think also limiting the activity in the maritime woodland area could be, is important so that we can understand what exactly we're working on and we want to protect. If you want to protect backyard birds, have people walk around just like they walk around everywhere else. I mean, if that's the priority. But if you want to protect unique species that use these types of habitats that you might not necessarily see in your backyard, then you need to take a little bit more nuanced approach.
So Josh, I think what Mike is asking, I think what everybody is wondering is the impact from humans at the same level as an impact from a dog? Is there a difference?
So the studies have found that impacts from humans and impacts from dogs are very close. There's a little, it's very close. I mean, presence of humans is equally a threat to wildlife as dogs are. Dogs are a little bit more aggressive, more vocal, a little less control, naturally, and so I think there's that aspect.
Are you speaking about on leash is what I heard you say?
Even on leash, yeah. This is even on leash. So, off leashes, I mean, dogs are much worse than humans off leash. And so I think
there's some parity on leash is what I heard you say earlier.
Yeah. So to answer that question, I think from a truly, and again, from a truly scientific, objective standpoint, humans are going to disturb a wildlife as much as a leash dog. I would consider that probably the case right now.
So would you also say that if this committee or this community decided it was a priority to every now and then have a music concert on in a particular area of the island where there would be foot traffic and car traffic and noise, that would also be something that would be an extremely high adverse impact, right?
That's what we would list as an extremely high impact, right?
Okay.
But those impacts, and we didn't include it in this, is, you basically, the tiered approach, what we do is we say, we sort of have a 1 to 4 tiering level, right? Where we have 1, which is no activity, no touch, stay away from, to a tier 4, which is, any activity, type of thing, which is this sort of high, extremely high type of scenario, right? So if I'm looking at it just right now, not having done the studies, anything don't understand at the site, I'd say extremely high areas communities where you want to allow that to occur are manicured lawns and garden areas, right? So around the houses, around the areas that have been disturbed, where the habitat value is very low, or and the function is very low. So whereas the not disturbed, the high tier 1 would be salt marshes, mud flats, wetlands, those types of areas where we would not want to disturb. So somewhere in between, you then talk about this sort of low to medium type of activities and what's allowed, what you expect to what you allow. And some of those things are can be controlled by, for example, perhaps it's a situation where you have boardwalks and the boardwalks are raised and it keeps people very specifically in an area and keeps them from going off trail. Whereas you having a wood chip trail, which is then not ADA compliant, so you're reducing the number of people, but you're very specific about who can and would be able to use that type of trail. So there's a lot of talk about what I'd be working with, the rest of the team on identifying what sort of controls, what kind of activities, what kind of designs would be implemented that would affect human behavior, essentially.
And I think, so we like this term tiered, because I think what is being shared and is even expressed in the survey is there's a lot of interest to be on the island. There's also a lot of interest about what's on the island already, and so trying to come up with a solution where we maximize basically the best for all the living creatures that are on the island and make a mutually, I think, beneficial world is what we're seeking to understand how to do. And then I think there is a sort of almanac, to use a old-fashioned word, but there's a calendar that's going to be most important to the community and a calendar that is also going to be relevant to the different species that we may be trying to protect or not. And again, just to go to where I began earlier tonight, we're not going to with any recommendation tonight. I think what I was trying to foreshadow, maybe Mike, is that I think where we are in our findings is that there's a lot that's significant on the island, and we are learning to understand it, and our own sense is that there are risks depending in which direction you take, and it feels like this is a community that wants to have a lot of knowledge and move quickly, but move with a kind of shared understanding. So I guess my sense is it is amazing what is on this island. I mean, truly, deeply amazing. And there are going to be some hard decisions, right? Because we are going to open, I think that's that decision the town made by buying this. There are going to be more people than there used to be on this island. And there are probably going to be more animals of one kind or another. So it's just who's going to be prioritized and how we make that decision and when we make it is feeling quite, I think, something that needs a lot of consideration, I guess, that's my professional feeling at the moment.
I think actually that prompted me for a question I had for Josh. That your presentation was tremendous. You used tiered and you used protected, but you used the word required once. Are there, and so what I'm trying to get to, because I like to have boundaries. Are there certain species here that you think might be on that island that are going to require protection? And what that protection is, we don't have to drill into here, but as a starting point, and I'm not putting you on the spot. The answer could be I don't know.
I think the answer is I don't know.
Okay, I heard the word and I'm like, I hear required.
So there is, the only thing is, right, I was going to say the bald eagle is one that is, there's federal law, right?
That's what I was thinking.
And they are required to be protected by federal law.
Yep.
Now, there's guidance on how to protect them. And those guidance isn't, if you know, guidance isn't regulation. It's not, it's just guidance then. But the guidance, but what is law is what's referred to as a take, right? In endangered species, and the take is basically there's a whole litany of words, but it's basically any disturbance of wildlife, intentional or unintentional. So for a bald eagle, for example, if you disturb it off its nest, technically and it abandons its nest and the egg, would be considered a take. And that's the case for any endangered species in anywhere. So I think federally endangered species. I think the state has a different way of approaching it, but let's just use the federal for now. So that's the concern, is that there are requirements to not disturb the species.
Understood. We don't have to get too far.
And but that's an example.
That's kind of where I'm just thinking, let's find what we might have to do, and then the community's going to give us feedback, more feedback. We've got good feedback already on what they're interested in doing, lots of things we want to dig, want to do. and lots of things they want to protect.
Yeah.
And I'm just seeing a collision course. I'm just speaking what
Yeah.
I'm
I mean, the same thing goes to habitat. Let me just answer this, is that same thing goes to habitat, right? The town doesn't have jurisdiction over coastal habitat coastal wetlands, but they have inland wetlands, right? So they have their regulations, they have their requirements regarding what activities can happen in or around inland wetlands, for example. So in that sense, there are requirements that need to, regulatory requirements that have to be considered in this. So it's layered. It's all layers of who's in charge of it regulatorily, but also then from for you all, how you in charge of it from a conservation standpoint.
So Josh, when you mentioned disturbance, you've identified one species that we recognize right off, right?
Mm.
The eagle. And
Yep.
you know we have a pair, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say disturbance, what does that actually mean? Does that mean somebody walking on the trail? Is that a disturbance? What's the definition?
So it's
Or do you not know?
No, I do. For eagles, so disturbance, it's basically any activity within that 330 feet that has the potential to denest the bird or the pair. And so that's the disturbance. It could be walking. And this is the thing about eagles is that, again, not knowing how many people have been on there, eagles can respond differently to different habitats that they're in. Similar to deer or to raccoons or any other species. They become very adaptable. I won't quite use that, but that's the word I'll use. But they become very adaptable to their surrounding and where they are. So I've known eagles that have nested within 600 feet of I-91, right? You'd think that would scare them away, but they found the right tree, they found it, and they got used to it. They became assimilated to that habitat. So I think that's the situation. So your eagle nesting pair, maybe they're fine with people walking around underneath them. I don't know. I don't know what is or is not. I don't know where they nest on the island, how close it is to any of the walking trails, any of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but disturbance would be just anything that would cause them to want to abandon the nest and go somewhere else, which they clearly haven't, right?
Right.
But did they just nest this year?
No,
They've been nesting there.
Yeah.
So whatever's been going on the island, they seem to accept it as not a threat.
Yeah.
But they have moved
They
a
have
couple
moved.
times
Yeah.
On the
That has
island.
been going on.
in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
They've moved from one side of the island to the other side of the island, and, so they have moved.
And that's sometimes a matter of just quality of tree that they're in, and the nest, and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Summer
John-
house, winter house. I don't know.
So you mentioned baseline information and you don't have that. So give us an idea of how long you'll take to get this information to us.
I mean, to get that information, we're at the end of the season, growing season, breeding season, migration. Everybody's going away, right? Everybody's settling down. So the information, to get a complete pack information, a complete sense of what's going on, you really need a full year.
Okay, you need all the seasons.
You need all the seasons. You need to, and notably, you really need the time, from March to now. Is that time frame. This time, you can get a lot of the information you get over the winter. You would likely get, you could get over that period as well. But it's really that sort of that migration and breeding season that you want to be able to pick up on.
Which again is when?
It's usually, I would usually put that between March and October. March through September. I guess that's maybe the way to think of it. Yeah. And what that does is it provides you the baseline data to work from. And it would be, it would be a complete flora and fauna survey, out on site, several times. We can also work with either citizen scientists or groups that exist in the area, like Connecticut Audubon or Audubon, National Audubon, or or other groups that might be there that that are gathering data. So it's the Land Trust does what they do, but the Nature Center, if they do stuff or host things, that type of thing. So there's other ways to gather data. It doesn't have to be just us as consultants. We can rely on other resources too.
But I think that is a big question actually ahead of us, is whether or not we want to undertake that level of assessment. I mean, that I think as sort of.
Is there a
part of the
cost
reason-
associated with that assessment that's not currently in your budget? If you
Yeah,
want to
so
do all these things,
Correct.
what would
yes,
that added
right.
cost be?
Or we would have to partner with one of these organizations that would be interested in doing like.
Assuming there's no one to partner with now, assuming that.
It
we
would
had
be
a
an additional
fit-
cost, and I actually, I asked what the cost would be, because as part of our base scope, we're doing
Right.
this very initial sort of preliminary set of understandings. Josh said that he would need more time to really understand what the cost would be. So to me, like the point of our conversation today is to sort of bring forward, there is a high-level assessment, which we are doing, and we're getting close to being complete. It's still in draft, but the sort of initial understanding of what is on the island is getting close to being in a place to make a vision set of decisions. But as I think Mark stated, there's some big choices ahead of the community in terms of which direction to go in. And I think there's clearly time questions involved in some of this, right? So there's multiple rates of wanting to mobilize, and there's some consequences depending on which way you go. And so I think that's maybe where we are right now, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation now is because we are preparing with all this information that's coming in to bring forward choices to the community about which kinds of scenarios, how quickly you want to move, how much infrastructure, how much conservation versus activation is really in the best interest of the community. And so we're starting to have some of the base material to be able to get to that vision, but I think basically, Mike, there's still a little bit more conversation probably and getting out of draft phase. And then I think we could come to you with, like, if you really wanted to do a full assessment, take the year, what would that mean? And who would you partner with if you didn't want to have to pay, and if you wanted to pay, what would that mean?
Right. Well, that would be part of the assessment because, and to be clear, if it's something that you're recommending, if you think that it's so terribly important to take a full year study, then that's something that I would think this committee and the Board of Selectmen and this community needs to hear, but we would also have to hear what that cost would be, and without assuming partnership with anybody. Because right now, we don't have any partners. Maybe we'll get some, maybe we won't, but we would need to know that information.
I think that makes sense too. I mean, I sort of anticipated that position, so yes, that makes sense to me.
Essentially, we're talking about scope.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and, you know, I think this is a good time to bring up the scope of, you know, when we were at the first session, the public session, for the community session, I think I was standing with you and somebody was asking you, you know, what is the scope of your contract and what you're doing? And, you know, are we looking at Great Island in juxtaposition of other properties that we own as a community? But where I go back to the scope now is, like, in the news recently, we've seen, you know, 3 or 4 coves east from Great Island, Manresa has just been announced to be turning into a park as well. Now that park is going to be, they've announced early on that they're going to leave they're going to tear down a lot of the, you know, the oil tanks and remediate a lot of the coal ash and things like that. But they're going to leave the structure of the power plant, and you're talking about putting things like a craft brewery type thing inside of there. So I think that, like, as we see that there's going to be another island very nearby that is going to have, they're telegraphing that right from the beginning, that kind of activity is going to be happening on that property, then I think we need to just make sure that as we move forward, that we want to, like what you're saying, is we need to understand that, you know, the head on the swivel a little bit to understand what's happening around us. And that, you know, and so just, anyway, as we talk about scope, and And that just brings me to another point. I think we've covered a lot. This has been awesome with what Becca went over to at the first third, second third, with the ecology. And I think we're heading in now to this third part with Ben, with governance and finance. So it's already 9 o'clock. I just wonder, since we haven't scratched the surface on that, and that's a new topic, governance, and is whether it would make better sense to start fresh and have, and table Ben to the next meeting. And because we do have other things on our agenda tonight, and if that would make better sense then, because I think we've got a good, I know that I really want to hear what Ben has to say, but I don't know that.
I hear you, but you know what, Bruce? Yes, we will talk about dogs, and that's a discussion that we'll have, but we also have an expert here, and people do want to learn about other aspects of this project, and governance is really important. It was a very, very important part of why we hired Reed Hildebrand in the first place, so I would say we stick with the
I don't think it's a 20-minute conversation. I mean, I'd like to make a motion that we push the governance, that we push Ben's presentation to the next meeting due to time and courtesy to him, because I don't think it's a 15-minute conversation, especially as we introduce it.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, just to discuss it. I'll second it. Discussion?
Discussion.
Respectfully, I've been involved in a lot of meetings in government, and usually when we have either staff or experts in attendance, we do usually respect that they've made the time to be here. I understand exactly your point. I don't want,
and I don't have that kind of.
I'd like to know, Becca, but we don't want to rush it either. I do know 2 hours in these meetings, people's attention starts to wane. I'll speak for myself, so I want to do it justice, but I also understand what Bruce is saying. But I do respect the time has been made, the effort's been made to be here. So I would proceed.
Are we being cut off at any particular time?
No.
For the meeting?
10 o'clock, they kick us out of here, right? The staff, the cleaning people. Did you ask when we have to leave?
Yeah.
Usually it's usually 10.
Is it 10?
Are we allowed to ask Ben what he thinks?
I'm here for all of you. So I'm very happy to come back and do a dedicated session at the same time.
How long do you think you need to talk?
It's really up to you. I could do a quick version, or we could go in depth.
Okay, so what's the quick version, what's the in-depth version?
The in-depth version is 15 to 20 minutes. I mean, the quick version, yeah.
The quick version.
In-depth would be more like 30 minutes, 45 minutes.
Did you plan on talking for 30 or 45 minutes tonight?
I'm flexible, so I can do either.
Okay, so I'll tell you what, my suggestion is that we let Ben give his presentation. We'll have another meeting, most likely. I'm going to ask you, I've started polling you, but I'll ask everybody if November 7th works. And at that point, Ben, if you're available, maybe you could come back, and at that point, we'll have at least an understanding of what you're presenting, and we'll be able to ask some questions then. So we'll keep the questions till the next meeting, but we'll at least get some exposure.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
We have a motion and a second, so we
Yes.
need a vote.
All in favor of Bruce's motion? You don't have to.
Oh, yeah, no, I
Still
still
with it,
support
okay. So Bruce made a motion, and Mike seconded, and all in favor is Bruce, and all opposed? Okay. All right, Ben?
That introduction, Ben.
Come on Keep it snappy.
What governance means to me. I've asked Siri not to come to the table also, so. Let's do a framing, right? I just want to make sure we do a walkthrough and everybody has a sense of what governance is and how we're going to attack it together, right? Just as a reminder, so I'm Ben Margolis, James Lehman Planning Development. We're helping on 3 areas of focus, and we talked about this previously. The first is programming, and we're all well into that process. As a complement to the survey, and Bruce, your point, we're actually undertaking a gap, what's called a gap analysis. So we're looking at Darien and depending on use, a certain distance from Darien, and to understand where potential gaps in programming exist and also make sure we're not being duplicative, right? So that's happening, and we look forward to coming back and giving you a sense of that analysis. That's informing the programming piece. That will lead to operations and funding. So think of that as a business plan for management of Great Island, right? Second big component of our work, which all leads to governance. How and who will actually manage Great Island? And we sense a lot of interest here. So I think let's do a high-level sort of quick walkthrough together of different, I would say, scenarios for Great Island, right? And we're in the visioning phase. There's visioning, master planning, construction, and then the rest of life after that. But to simplify, right, you could think about sort of 3 differing levels, and each has different levels of town investment, control, engagement. The first being just a public ownership and management model, right? Maybe with support from a friends of group, but the town and a public agency directly owns and manages the island. It invests in infrastructure, amenities, programming, maintenance. And here, the benefits might be the town has strong control of mission and everything else. Challenge might be, obviously, cost, significant public investment, capital, and ongoing. The second sort of high-level model, called a public-private partnership, or P3. So the island is publicly owned, but a private entity or nonprofit is contracted to develop and manage certain aspects, such as programming, events, commercial activities, and the town would provide partial funding and oversight. Possible benefits of that: you're leveraging private expertise and capital, you're sharing costs and risks. Challenges: you have to balance public interest with private motives, right? Ensure affordability, access, and maybe managing potential conflicts of interest. Third, going towards the right, and these are all moving from town ownership to less town ownership. You have maybe a conservation trust or nonprofit management. So an organization or land trust assumes management of the island either through a lease or through acquisition, with a focus on conservation, preservation, and maybe limited or controlled public access. And I can go into why that might be. And the town basically contributes to an endowment or provides grants. This is a total simplification. And I would recommend next time we meet, or when it works for you, we go into more in depth with each of these. But if we go to the far right circle, right, positives: you're lowering ongoing public investment, you're protecting the island's ecological and cultural assets, there's the potential for philanthropic funding, the nonprofit may have more opportunities to be innovative if it has more control over its management. Challenges: there's potential for limited public access or programming, there's reliance on donations and grants, and you have reduced direct public control. So that's dependent on your priorities. I think at this point, we just want to make sure that even if, say, you landed on or close to that third circle, and you transition to a nonprofit or land trust, the town role, its areas of financial responsibility, its administrative time, its engagement, will shift and evolve over time, and we're talking about years, in fact, and that's important to understand. But you will always have a role. The town will always have a role, even if you went as far to the right on that spectrum as you wanted to. So take that from our scope, right? We talked about scope just a couple of minutes ago. In our visioning phase, let's say you wanted to set up a land trust or nonprofit management. In the visioning phase, which we're in, you would be more of like a facilitator and a community representative, which is what you're doing right now in real time. You're supporting engagement, you're planning, you're thinking about program and operations. We'll do some governance planning in this phase. We'll identify and focus in on options. And we probably outline the organizations, that nonprofit structure, maybe start talking to potential partners. And that's probably what we want to do in this vision phase, because remember, we've got to get closer on programming and therefore get closer on what it's going to take to operate and maintain, even at a high level, to begin really, really focusing in on governance. But there's work that we can be doing in the interim, like really outlining where you want to be on this spectrum and beginning to talk to other organizations and other places that model themselves in a particular way. When we get into the master planning phase, right, you're becoming much more of a planning partner and an oversight authority. So you are formalizing the governance structure. You're clarifying the town versus nonprofits roles. You're developing monitoring mechanisms. You're obviously providing regulatory support. You're facilitating public input. You're basically building an initial business model and plan during the master planning process of our time together. Then during construction, and remember construction happens in phases. This is ideally when you actually formally put a nonprofit together, you formalize it. You're supporting a nonprofit in its capacity building, you're providing interim services because on day one, no entity is going to be ready to do everything, right? So you have to be prepared for that. In fact, we've been talking about maybe the need for an interim management plan to really be thinking about, depending on what model the town wants to go with. You know, being ready, it's not like you choose a nonprofit partner, they start, and your job is done completely. You're going to have to provide a lot of support in the interim. So it's going to be important for the town to prepare for that. But it's during construction where you're coordinating permits and approvals, you're monitoring progress, and you're creating basically a functioning nonprofit with a board, formal agreements on roles and obligations, leadership, staff, and then you're kind of off to the races there. And then ongoing, you become much more of a oversight and monitoring, and you meaning the town, right? And the public and the community. You become a funding partner and you become a regulatory sort of authority, and you have that relationship with, if, again, this is all if you went towards number 3, okay?
With regard to a public-private partnership, do you think that would be a difficult scenario to envision for the island, considering that the things that we've been talking about to date don't really envision a lot of profit activity? I mean, we haven't been talking about things that generate great, getting great amounts of people onto the island, spending money. I don't really have any background in those kind of public-private partnerships, but is a bedrock principle there that the private entity is going to be wanting to churning some money there, right? Or no, just tell me I'm wrong. Easy to do.
Totally depends. Right?
Okay.
I think there's many ways of just think of an agreement with a private entity. There's the Olmsted Parks Conservancy in Louisville as an example that we always point to. It's actually a series of parks, and they're publicly owned, but the nonprofit shares management responsibility, right? The city provides maintenance support. there's a lot of different variables along that spectrum. So that you're not exactly going to land on 1, 2, or 3, and there's different ways of shaping it. Again, the positives of a private entity is that there's probably some expertise and they have access to resources. But the challenge is managing that relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then number 3.
But Bruce, do we want to get into Q&A right now, or do we want to let Ben finish and save our questions for next time? I'm looking at the clock.
Sorry about that.
I just feel like if we're doing this, we should do it. I mean, that we made a decision to do it. So, I mean.
Go ahead.
No, it's up to you.
All right, so number 3, the conservation trust. So like Waveney is a conservancy, right? Was Waveney example of number 3? Or Central Park? What are
Actually,
they?
Central Park is an example of number 1.
Oh, it is?
So even though it's different because it's on a grand scale, but the Central Park Conservancy, the city provides substantial public funding for Central Park. Access is free, right? The public can come and go. And the nonprofit works really closely with the Parks Department, but it's the Parks Department of New York City that is driving lots of decision-making, right? So, so it's not really. An example would be, I have one here, and we can look it up together, but this is also another one we point to. It's near Seattle, but it's a county. It's Kings County, Washington. Friends of Island Center Forest. It's a nonprofit that handles operations, maintenance, stewardship. The county offers regulatory support and some infrastructure funding, but the nonprofit drives the day-to-day. Right.
Okay. So I hear what Monica's saying. I mean, I think the depth and the breadth of this conversation is big, and we haven't cracked this open yet. Tonight's the first time we're cracking this.
Yes.
So that's only what I was saying. I mean, Ben, I very much want to hear what you have to say, and I want to talk about it at length. So what do we do? Let him finish and then put him on the agenda again?
Yes,
for,
absolutely.
Yeah,
But
because I think we owe him
Absolutely.
more time.
Well, I think also you are owed, I mean, to me, the reason I wanted, and to some extent, like, an apology for how much content there is tonight, but I think we tried to edit it down. There is just so much that actually we need to get in front of you and we need to have on the table. I think it's possible that we could do a Zoom session for this. I think that's probably the wisest course of action.
It's hugely important. I mean, right from when you guys presented at the very beginning, I remember seeing Ben, listening to Ben, and I was really very curious about, I was like, this is going to be a huge part of what we do.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know, maybe because it is close to 9:30 already, I might make a recommendation that we do have let's just say like a 1-hour Zoom session that is entirely about this subject. And if you guys have specific questions or things like organizations that you know of that you want us to look into a little bit to sort of explain to you a little bit what they actually are, because I think, right, many of us would have said the Conservancy falls in number 3, and in fact, it doesn't, right? So to me, though, as we're moving into the scenarios that we need to bring to the community next month, I think there's a degree of literacy that this committee needs to have about these questions, because your community is so invested in understanding program at the same time as they understand governance and revenue. So
that's a great idea.
I just, for me, the two things that I have felt like needed to come forward immediately for us to develop our scenarios are this greater depth of ecological understanding, which again, as Josh said many times, it's not the full depth, but it is much more than we knew before this meeting began, let's just say. And I think similarly, these questions around governance and revenue are actually very critical paths. So if Monica, you can canvass everybody, and then I would also say if the committee can share some particular points of interest so that Ben can be even more pointed in the way that he shares his expertise. I think I will just say, as Riedelbrand, as the lead, I would be deeply appreciative, because we want you all to have as much confidence in where we're headed as we possibly can, basically as quickly as we can. And so I would also just say, I have completely absorbed the message that trying to make excellent decisions with speed is part of your culture. And so while I may be offering some cause for hesitation in certain directions tonight, I am very clear on the message that you are all very motivated to be moving ahead with great speed.
Okay, so that brings us to our next point. So Ben, are you finished with your?
You may have a few.
Absolutely, and just noting this is an ongoing, this isn't, one and done.
Right. No, definitely
This is a process, and we want to provide you a framework for making good decisions. But we're in the very beginning. I also want to be clear about that, right? That we've got to get programming ideas to another level of definition and consensus. And then we've got to look at what it would take to fundraise at a high level, fundraise and manage that program of activities, whether they be passive, active, or both. And that's going to lead to, governance is almost like the end of the equation, right? So don't feel pressure right now. I'm just going to suggest to not feel total pressure to become total experts at governance and know exactly where you're going with this right now. It's going to have to be a result of the work that's already going on. But I agree, it's a really good idea. Maybe we can make it a half hour Zoom.
Yeah, sure.
Just to save everybody's brains. To provide you with a framework, continue this a little more in-depth with some visuals that provides you and the community a better sense of what decisions you're going to need to make and why, and have that information as you're going more in depth into program operations, maintenance, and sort of the business plan part of building out the business plan in the vision phase and the master planning phase.
I think it would be great in that meeting to have, like, if you could present us with some case studies of like a Waveney or a Todd's Point or a Central Park or whatever. So, like, why is it what it is? This is what it is, and here's some reasons why we think they went that way and it works beautifully for them.
We'll show you our own work, for sure. Yep.
So do you think, Becca, that this is a meeting that we should combine with the pre-November 16th meeting, or should this be a standalone? I feel like this should be a standalone.
I think it should be a standalone, and I think if we could keep it to half an hour, I support that. But to me, I think this is a critical path.
Okay, so I'll circle back and we'll figure out a way to make this happen on the Zoom level.
Great.
Yeah, Monica, somewhat related, is Reed Hildebrand familiar with what I view as a very positive relationship the town has with the library, which I think is a private entity or independent entity? I mean, we have a model in town that works, may not work for a park, but.
Okay, sure.
We had the librarian at our education meeting.
Okay.
But we did not know about the business model, so thank you for that tip right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. Becca, last for you is the workshop.
Thank you. So our next workshop, so the idea is to do a reprise of the town hall session that was so enthusiastically attended, and basically have a meeting here again. And the schedule roughly is on the board here, but we would begin at 10 the way we did before with the 10:45 presentation. So 10:45 is when everyone would need to be seated. At 11:15 we would have Q&A. Our thought is that as much as possible we would not have breakout groups in this session, but that we would give one presentation and potentially have breakout question tables. So people who want to know more about specific things, they can talk to experts with questions, but we're not going to try and have more boards as part of that. And then given the excitement about the tours and particularly the enthusiasm about that in the afternoon, we would like to have maybe more tours or potentially host something in the Manor House. I think there is a question which we need to work out, which we've discussed, about whether or not we would have like someone from the fire station and an EMT or something on the island if we wanted to occupy one of the buildings, given some of the reservations that they have stated. So that is a possibility, but we're just exploring those options. I think the idea that there's something that happens on the island, but it's informal and it's just experiential, and it isn't about trying to process information or make decisions. It's just to really be on the island and experience it.
Like I think you said, you're talking about this workshop possibly being held there.
So the workshop itself will be at the town hall in the morning, 10:45, big presentation. Not very long, only a half an hour, with information that is available at tables for Q&A afterwards, and then something experiential in the afternoon.
Yeah, okay.
Will that be followed up by a survey?
Yes, and I think a more pointed survey, not a general survey. So a pretty targeted survey. It probably won't have as many questions. Is actually one of the things that we're thinking. So be less of a time commitment for people to fill out, and specific for some of the questions that we're trying to have more depth about.
Before I forget, Reed did give us a PowerPoint kind of presentation for us to roll on Channel 79 from the last, from all of the slides, from all of the storyboards. And you brought the storyboards, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then we're also, those storyboards had a lot of information. So Linda and Karen are looking at where we can put them. Maybe downstairs, or we have some artist things where we hang kids' paintings, so something like that. So that'll be up next week. So that'll reinforce the information that we collected from the first community engagement.
This is community event 2 of 3, is that so? Yep.
And then we have penciled like February and May for 3 and 4, correct?
February and May, correct.
Okay.
Was it 16th? I think so. Sorry, we added one.
Yep. Yeah, Saturday,
November
16th.
16th, thank you.
Yeah.
November 16th, Saturday.
And just regarding putting stuff up, and it'd be a good idea to get it up before we allow early voting, because then all the people coming in to vote.
That's a great idea. Okay.
We'll see.
Okay.
Only for that district, but.
Okay, so next item up is discussion and possible vote on amending or changing the access rules for Great Island. So before we get moving on anything, I'd like to make a motion to reinstate the no smoking policy that was in the early access rules dated February 5th. That said, no persons shall use, carry, or smoke a lighted cigarette, cigar, or pipe, any type of e-cigarette or vaporizer, or other smoking material on the property. I think this was just inadvertently left off of the old rules. So, may I have a second? Lori seconds. Any discussion?
Is that, do we do that elsewhere?
We had it in the original rules, and when we revised the rules, this just fell off.
Is this also in our other parks?
Yes.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
So
I think that's what
it's just
you meant.
keeping consistent?
Right.
Right.
And our other non-park land as well, right?
Yep.
Presumably, okay.
And I want to thank Molly Hirsch for pointing this out. So, any more discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Okay, discussion on anything else? I think we all want to discuss dogs, so who wants to start the discussion?
Well, I mean, I'll start and say that I have not heard tonight any persuasive argument for waiting to allow residents to bring their dogs on leash onto that island. I know that one version of the, that we had last time was a seasonal aspect. I not in favor of necessarily a limitation, but I don't want to preclude discussion of that. I mean, I've heard tonight that talks about more in-depth study and waiting for, waiting an additional year and a season, and I just think that's, unacceptable and inadvisable, considering the public interest in this topic that we've seen so far. And to those who would argue, well, no one listens to the rules as they are in our other parks, I think one of our young public comment people very eloquently said that's not really a reason to punish everyone else. I think also that there are ways that we can create fine structures for people who do not obey those rules down the road. But it seems like at every step we're creating roadblocks. Oh, we have to enforce it. We have to have better enforcement before we try this. Oh, we have to make sure that we have a complete understanding of the adverse impact on every single species on that island, which we don't even know yet, and we don't have a plan to discover yet. So I think all those things add up to too much time, in balance with the ability that if there are grievous circumstances, there are always abilities to amend those rules. And to, again, to those who say, well, once you give something, you can't take it away. I think, if nothing else, we've experienced in our lives that those kinds of things happen all the time. And you have to sometimes be nimble. And I very strongly feel that it's time to let our residents who are paying for this island to be able to get on that island with their dogs on leash.
What percentage of dogs off leash is acceptable to you?
None. I don't.
But if you can't enforce it, then.
But then enforce it. You can't say you're not going to do it because you have an inability to enforce it, or you know what, let's ban dogs from every single town property that we have now. And no one is talking about that. This is a Darien park, and I understand it's new in our inventory, and I understand that, but to say that, well, we're not going to allow dogs on that island because we can't enforce a rule is just, it's backwards. If it's that important, work to enforce the rule. Otherwise, it's just silly. Oh, you know what, let's close Woodland Park. Let's say no dogs at Cherry Lawn, because sometimes some people disobey. We don't do that anywhere else. There's no reason to do that here.
I think we need to, should we move forward with this, I think we need to make an appeal to the community, our fellow residents, to say this is the way that this rule is changed. It's on leash. But at the same time, I wouldn't stop short with just that appeal. I would absolutely pursue stiff enforcement. And, I think, honestly, if you got your dog running around, then you should be slapped with at least a $250 ticket. And that's a first offense. And if you do it again, then it goes to doubles, to $500. And I think that the dog warden should be down there.
We don't have one.
Well, I understand, but there's an open rec. So we're gonna hire one, right? Or are we just getting rid of that position?
No, we
have to have one by law.
We're sharing one.
Okay, so we're gonna get one, and I think the dog warden should have the power to write a ticket for this. So if that doesn't exist today, then we can, this committee can't do that, but this town can do this, and frankly, it has nothing to do with Great Island. This should be done in Cherry Lawn and everywhere else, because if there's people that are being inconvenienced by dogs off leash, then they're ruining it for everybody else. And bad actors should be handled,
But we don't have the ability in town today in order to do that, not because we don't have a dog warden, but because we don't have a fine structure.
But Dan, I think That,
The ordinance is in
Lori
place.
says the problem's been going on for decades, okay? It's not something that has to be fixed in the next 10 minutes. It's something where, you know, we've held back access by dogs for the year plus that we've allowed people to go on, I guess it's not a year plus,
People have
but
been on for a year.
but since March. But we held it back, and then anyway, I think that I've received a lot of input. I think the committee has received a lot of input, because we all got the same emails. There's been people that have weighed in on both sides. There's been obviously a tremendous amount more people saying, I'd like to walk my dog on a leash. In fact, I haven't even seen a whole lot of people say, I want off-leash. I've seen a couple that say you should build an off-leash portion at some point. And I've seen a lot of the people that said they don't want dogs say, I don't mind dogs, I had a dog, I like dogs, but I'm a little scared of dogs, I don't want dogs off leash, and if the dogs were on the leash, I'd be okay with it. So, I don't know, I think that given the fact that we're going into the cold weather, whether we say that this is, you know, a seasonal thing or not, I don't know, but I do think that we should try dogs on a leash on Great Island, and I think that it's a missed opportunity if we let this go by and we go into the winter and the spring and we don't get any experience with this type of use of the property.
Okay,
And I'll-
based on time, I'm just going to go around the room. Jeff, I'll go to you next. I want everybody to be able to say something, what they're thinking, but then we need to keep moving. Okay, so then we'll be looking for a motion. So Jeff.
Well, I guess I kind of go back to Dan's question. I don't think you need a very high fail rate. And so what is it we're going to be looking at as we test this trial period of dogs? What would be a fail?
That's a question for me.
For anyone.
I would say
If we can always adjust it, if it fails, what is
a fail
failure?
would be dogs running around off leash all the time, excrement, you know, in places it doesn't belong. A fail would be, you know, someone being bitten or something by a dog that was off a leash or even on a leash. I think, but without inviting residents with their dogs, we get zero of that experience, other than what we think might be the case.
Okay, Jeff, you have any other?
Well, again, I just, in thinking about this, and I was interested that the dogs have no greater impact than humans, because I've read things that the scent of dogs, and particularly the scent of possibly hundreds of dogs a day, which based on the response I don't think is unfathomable, that syncs up well with the overwhelming positives in the word cloud, you know, about pristine natural environment. And frankly, even though they're much smaller in number, I think having 100 dogs and 200 people out there is a different experience for everyone than, you know, trying one dog-free park in Darien. And if there was a good one to try that in, it seems like this could be it. So that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Kip?
I think, you know, we hear pristine, but I also saw untouched come up there, and I don't think I necessarily agree 100% with that. I think we've heard that there's been horses roaming the island, there's been dogs roaming the island, there's other wildlife roaming the island, and there's been development on the island. So I don't know if I 100% agree with untouched. So I am all for conservation and preservation, but there is already something that hasn't been preserved and conserved 100%. So I don't know that, I agree enforcement needs to be heavily weighed on as a town issue. I'd like to, you know, think that I have enough trust in our residents to move forward with allowing dogs on island. And again, yes, we should consider what is failing and it can be something that is taken away if it does fail. So I think I'm for moving forward with dogs, and it should be closely monitored.
Dan?
I've heard it myself, and I'm sure others have, which is a mind your own business. If you tell somebody, hey, that dog's supposed to be on a leash, or I'm a taxpayer, I can do what I want. And I think a dog off a leash, and this is my only concern, because I'm voting for dogs on leash as soon as we can enforce it, and the guy can't point his finger back at me, is that it ruins the experience of people who don't have dogs and see the dog running loose, and they go, they're not supposed to be like that. And they go to the Great Island to have a peaceful experience. Instead, now it's been ruined by somebody, or a dog walker with a leash who says, why is my dog on a leash when that person doesn't have to have theirs on a leash? And there's nothing we can do to tell that person to put the dog on a leash. So, like I said, until it's enforceable, I'm not voting for it.
Mark?
I'm responding to really two sources of information. One, the overwhelming information that came into the Great Island mailbox that very overwhelmingly supports dogs on the island. And I was looking to feedback from the community through the workshop, through the surveys, and while perhaps a future survey would be a little more pointed, the question about what do you do in public spaces, it was the third largest response was go there with my dog. And so I come out supporting dogs on leash. I recognize there's a gap in the enforcement mechanism, and so I would leave it to the discretion of the selectmen to get that remedied if it needs to be remedied, but I come out supporting dogs on the island. I spoke earlier about there being a conflict between the survey question about preserving the ecology, and then what do you want to do on the island? It's exercise and be closer to nature and be with my friends and adventure and experience. So there's going to be a vision that's going to come out of this that's going to be, you've said it many times, Becca, in the middle of that spectrum. We're trying to move forward with different things while that's developing. I've heard it said you can't walk it back once you put something out there. I disagree with that. If it's not what the community wants, we find out empirically that's not what they want, or we find out it can't be that way. Anything that's recommended, this committee doesn't necessarily enact anything it recommends, can be reversed when more information is available. That's where I come out with mine.
Well, if you want to call me backwards, I'll be guilty as charged. I'm going from the experience I've had on the Parks and Recreation Commission for 9 years, and the fact of the matter is the rules aren't followed. And we do get complaints from customers. I've had very heart-wrenching emails over the years of people who will not take their children into certain parks or have had other very unpleasant experiences, and I find that's heartbreaking, and I think we have to be responsible for all of the community needs. Yes, we did get a lot of emails. I personally suspect that there was some kind of Facebook post or something to the dog owners to ask them to, send a lot of emails because they came in a pretty quick and tight band. We got one from an RTM member today, said, gee, I just found out that this was happening. Had I known, I would have, gotten other people maybe to opine, or I would have opined or put something in the survey. So I think perhaps the non-dog owners or those who are concerned maybe didn't know maybe they should be sending input. I am concerned about enforcement, and we don't have it. I have personally met with the police over the years on numerous occasions asking for improved enforcement of our rules, and we have gotten nowhere. So one question I've had, have we yet discussed this with the police? And if we allow this, how are they actually going to help us enforce it? Has that conversation been had?
Well,
yes or no? Has it been had?
Well, yes, the police would prefer to give a warning the first time, but the reality is we don't have an ordinance with any teeth. And what I mean by that is there's no penalty. So, that would be something we would work with the RTM on. That's something that we would need the RTM to approve. And I personally was on the RTM for 9 years, and I don't think it's a heavy lift to close the loop on this and have some sort of actual fine attached to this, whether it's $100 or $250, whatever. But right now, that isn't on the books. So, and people know that. We've gotten comments and people know that. And just so you understand, as far as for the public, we did have a lot of people send emails in. I think it was probably 40, 45 that were for, 6 that were not in favor, a couple that were not in, that were, actually there were a number that were in favor of restricted time or restricted area. So I am a person that likes to compromise. I understand that there are a lot of people that want dogs there. I also understand that there's a process to follow, and we hired experts, and we're hearing firsthand that they are not prepared right now to make a recommendation on that. So I want us all to understand that we are not, by doing this, we're not following our consultant on this. And I think, okay, so if we want to have dogs there, let's think about what we do about the regulation. Do we get the regulation in place before we allow dogs? Will that make you feel better? Do we consider areas that are not accessible, like the bridle area?
Can we revisit where we're actually recommending that dog access is allowed? Because aren't we restricting some access anyway?
We haven't
We haven't
talked
gotten to
about that.
Okay.
So right now, we as a committee, we have recommended to the Board of Selectmen that we open up the property, pretty much all of it.
Okay.
So another thought would be that we keep dogs on the trail, anything that's paved. We keep them out of the bridle trail, away from the eagle, and we don't let them on the polo field or up by the house, whatever. That would be one possibility. Or we could look at, I don't know what the nesting times are, but we could look at, allowing it at certain times of year. And, I know that you're very interested, Mike, in solving this, and trust me, we're all getting these emails, and we would all like to move on this, but I firmly believe that the public is looking for us to take a really good look at every decision we make. And this is a big decision that we're making, and let's show them that we're doing it in a thoughtful way. That's what I ask. So again, we could look at restricting the hours, we could look at restricting the time of year, we could look at restricting where they go on the property, we could hold off until we have the actual violations in place, or we could do none of the above and open the island up to dogs.
Can I mention one more thing?
Yes.
I just want to say that as of now, there are no dogs allowed at Pear Tree. So if people plan to park at Pear Tree with their dog to go there, that's currently not allowed under the rules.
Currently, we're talking about adding the regulation or amending the regulation to allow dogs on leashes on the island without restriction to place other than where their masters or their humans can't go. Based on everyone's comments, we have 4 people who are in favor of that. We have 4 people that are against it, and we have a member that is missing, though obviously he's on record. But, so for our purposes tonight, if we vote, I don't think we're going to pick up the 5th vote on, okay, well, let's, restrict it, or let's wait for us to create a fine structure. So we're going to be at 4-4.
No, not necessarily, Mike. Not necessarily. We could reach a compromise. We could say, dogs are going to be, we want to fast roll the violation thing, and we'll allow dogs on the paved areas, and we will make a recommendation that the Board of Selectmen pursue an ordinance with some sort of penalty, financial penalty. So there are, Mike, there are ways to do this
Those are
tonight.
3 elements
I
that
didn't
will
hear
take
4-4.
months necessarily to do. and it isn't really a compromise because it pushes it down, it pushes it down the road.
Mike, but relax.
Relax.
It doesn't necessarily push it down. We're not looking at three things. The only thing that is a time-sensitive thing here is putting some teeth to the violation. And yes, that will take some time. Mark can probably give us a better idea, but my guess is anything that we want to do on the RTM level will probably be not done until
The new session, right?
Until February.
So I may be missing something on the disconnect, but, so when you said you like to compromise, so what are we talking about?
Yeah, you know what, it's not me. I'm the chair, but it's not just me. I'm hearing from Dan and from Lori, and actually Jeff said something about the violations. So I'm asking you, would you be okay if we said to the Board of Selectmen, we want you to pursue putting in teeth on this, attaching some sort of financial penalty? Would that make your decision a little easier? And would keeping dogs on the paved area, and that means that you're not, if we have picnics on the polo field, the dog doesn't go there. The dog doesn't go and disturb the eagle in the bridle path. The dogs stay on the paved areas. Is that a compromise that people could get behind?
No. I can't. I mean, I just think that, like, once you have a family with pizza or some sandwiches they got at the deli, and they're going to sit down, and the kids are looking out over the water, and the mother or the father or both has the dog on a leash on the lawn, and they're behaving beautifully, like, I just don't see that we're saying, okay, is dad staying here on the pavement or tying the dog to a post lamp while they go sit and eat, and then the dog starts barking? I just don't see that it really makes a whole lot of sense. So
Does that move, understand, you're pretty solid on no compromises.
I'm more on a compromise that, like, I would say, like it was originally drafted in the rules that when we struck it, that it was time sensitive, and that we say this is a trial. That would be more of a compromise that I'd be open to say, let's try dogs on Great Island, let's beg people to follow the rules, and at the same time, let's send a message back to the Board of Selectmen and the police that we'd like to get a long overdue. I mean, Lori's the chair of Parks and Rec for 10 years. I'm astonished that if we know this, that this hasn't been addressed. But let's address it, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. So let's deal with it. I mean, it's that simple.
You can do both. You can let them on and rush a statutory scheme that will create more teeth. Instead of waiting for that, do both.
I don't think you need to wait on the enforcement. We've waited on the enforcement for, it seems like, over a decade. I mean, I'm a fairly new dog owner, so I am somewhat new to this. But, I mean...
Well, okay, so here's another compromise. What if we do it on a restricted basis as far as time? We keep the dogs on the trail, on the paved areas during that time, and we also put forth to the Board of Selectmen that we want teeth put into the ordinance.
I would be open to that. I think two things. One of the things that we were first talking about is why we want dogs allowed, and it was to get other people access to the island that haven't had access to the island, and get them on the island, get them thinking of ideas. I think that allows it. And I think our temporary access for people as well went through that time period where they can just be on the trails or just on the pavement. So I don't think it's unfair to apply that temporarily to dogs either. So coming from someone who's for the dogs, I would be open to a compromise that way.
I think you're just begging people to break the rules. I mean, it's just like...
I'm also for the enforcement.
We're making rules that are not present anywhere else in town, that you have to stay on the paved path. Like, I don't know where you can and can't have, like, can you have dogs at Highland Farm?
Well, Bruce, but we made
do
the
you
rule
have
for,
to stay on the paved path, or
we made
can
the
you
rule for
walk
people,
onto the
though.
grass?
We made the rule for people that we could only be on the paved roads, right?
I know, and people haven't liked it at all. and people haven't followed it.
Right, but it's temporary.
So, and people haven't followed it from day one.
I'd say they followed it as much as the dogs on leash people will, which is most people stayed on the paved path. So you had that majority that stayed on the paved path, and that minority, whatever that means, 49% or 20%, I don't know, who went off the path, right?
What kind of time restriction are you thinking of, Monica? The month thing that was originally in, like from, see how it goes from October to, through March?
Well, I would
What
be
was-
sensitive to to maybe Josh, Rebecca's input as far as migration and all of that. What would be a reasonable, if we wanted to try this for 3 or 4 months, what would be a reasonable, would that work?
The idea being minimal impact to ecology while we do this trial.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say that I think you'd be able to, right, putting my commission hat, because I did have a commission too in my time, so. I'll try to, from a ecology standpoint, your best solution would be to restrict it to the non-breeding season. So basically from October 1st through, at the latest, May 1st, but because of the eagles, I would probably say you'd probably want to cut that off by February 1st with the eagles. So you'd have the winter and the very early spring possibly.
For that northeastern node, to cut that.
Yeah, the bridle path only though, right?
Yeah.
But that sounds like a
I would say
human.
certainly for the northeastern node, but if you're saying they moved their nest and they moved their nest over the other side.
Well, they moved it like 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's been there for
But
a
that's the
long
thing,
time.
is you're dealing with uncertainty, right? And that's the thing, so.
But we
I
wouldn't,
think
but they wouldn't be in the Eagle area.
the recommendation would, that I would think as a group, you probably would be able to hold, is that what DEEP has for a lot of their parks, which is basically October 1st to May 1st. But you'll have to double check me on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's the dogs allowed anywhere, pretty much like, think like Hammonasset.
When do we currently cut it off at Weed? Isn't that like April 1st?
Weed is November 1st to March 31st, and it's one very limited.
Right, now I'm just
section.
saying of timing, if we did October 1st to March 31st, at least that would be consistent with the other place. I understand that there are different reasons and it's a limited area and those things, but at least it would be the same date.
I agree with that, Mike. Start having rule for this piece of property and this rule for this piece of property.
Well, I mean, ecologically speaking, different pieces of property, right? I mean, they support different communities.
No, I understand.
Right.
We're talking about a temporary or short-term.
I agree that it doesn't make sense to have different times at different places. It's hard enough to figure out what, if we're going to try to enforce this, then let's enforce it, so that so that people have a fighting chance of following the rules, right? Without having to keep separate rules for Great Island, for Weed Beach, for Cherry, let's.
But we don't have an eagle's nested weed, so
Yeah.
he was talking about February, I thought, being the cutoff.
Well, they actually
And-
said
and
May
actually, I-
31st, and then he said February, so if you compromised on those, that would really put you at the end of March, which would also be consistent with Weed.
And then cherry, the rules are different too, at different times of year that don't necessarily match up with weed. So if you've got a dog, check our rules, it's all there.
I don't think this is one and done. If some sort of window of time is offered up. There's another
Simple is usually
survey.
better.
Keep it simple.
Simplification.
Further information may come in if the questions are crafted to give us more feedback. The mission or the vision will start to become more defined. Whatever's enacted, if anything, tonight, could be modified, extended, or pulled back. That's just how I see it, is we're reacting to what we have, at least I am, what's been presented so far, trying to accommodate what a big segment of the community seems to want. But if we get it wrong and need to roll it back or expand it, it seems like that's an option. It's not, it's not.
Okay, so right now we're looking at allowing dogs October 1st to March 31st on paved areas, on leash, and we're going to request the Board of Selectmen start immediately on crafting an ordinance that will have some penalty to it. Will you be okay with that, Dan?
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that? Jeff? No?
Just let me make two statements, and then maybe I'll talk myself into being okay. I've heard a lot of discussion about, no other park has these rules. There is no other park like this. From what I heard in the ecological, there's a unique family, I don't remember the terminology used, of ecotypes in this space that I'm envisioning is maybe unique on the entire sound, maybe nationally unique. We have a chance to start fresh here, working with our community to do a comprehensive master plan envisioning of what we want this place to be. I'm concerned if this is viewed as a trial period and we don't have some sort of metrics on it and everybody kind of gets used to it, do we have a chance to go somewhere else once this is done? So it's not just the enforcement. What are the metrics we're really trying to achieve here? And I fully understand. I've read all the emails too. I don't have a dog now, but I've had many dogs throughout my life. I didn't always have to take them to the nature preserve. It's just, I'm not sure I see those things as ultimately being compatible. I'm not saying we need to wait another year to study and make a decision, but to do this now, I want to know what realistically the opportunity to reverse is going to be and how we're going to make that decision if we do.
And Jeff, and I hear you on that, and I don't agree with Mike on this. I have been in public office for a really long time. It is very, very difficult to roll things back. Very, very difficult. However, right now, we're in like a trial period.
Right.
So let's give Reed a chance to ask some very pointed questions, right? Of course, we get a lot of email, and of course, a lot of people were in support. But I'm sure there are a lot of people that, if there's a direct question answered, I think it was pretty much 50-50, right? So we'll be able to get some more information. And if this isn't working out, I do believe on this one we will be able to stop it. And it'll give, Josh a chance to continue his work. And, I personally, I would like to see the rules have teeth before we do this. I think that's the better process. But I also know that Mike and I will be very assertive with the Board of Selectmen on creating an ordinance, which I think will help the whole town. I think that this was just, frankly, it's just a little bit of a mistake on not closing the penalty bin.
And I'm expecting that come March 30th, if that's the date, that we're going to have to re-vote to either keep it going or stop it. So that's going to be our opportunity to roll it back if we're not happy with the results.
But the other thing I think is that, Great Island is a fairly unique place, but it's not a one-of-a-kind place. New Canaan has its version of Great Island, which is Waveney. It's not waterfront, but Todd's Point in Greenwich is waterfront.
Great Island is extraordinarily unique.
It is extraordinarily unique, but at the same time, it is the only place in Darien that is a 60-acre expanse that you can walk, and without feeling trapped at Woodland Park or Selleck's Woods, or again, I don't know where you're allowed to walk the dogs or not right now, but assuming that you can walk, I know you can walk at Woodland Park, but you're kind of trapped, and you don't have anything to look at really, other than tree trunks. So you've got a heck of a lot. Not everybody, but a lot of people that emailed us said they drive to New Canaan to go use Waveney all the time. So, Waveney's 300 acres, we're 60 acres, but they have dogs on Waveney, and they have dogs at Todd's Point. And so...
Well, okay, so I think we've reached sort of a consensus here. So, would somebody please make a motion?
Right, so let me know if I'm not crafting this correctly. I move that we amend the access rules to allow dogs on leash in the paved areas effective October 1st through March 31st. And then the reality of that motion is that if we want to extend it, we would have to actually vote to do that at some other point. If we do nothing at all by March 31st, then dogs will not be permitted during that time.
I'll second that.
Wait, say the last.
I was just saying procedurally, if we wanted to extend that time, we would have to vote and do that. Right now, if on this motion, the period of time for allowing dogs on that island on leash, on the paved areas, would be October 1 through March 31 of any given year, not 2024 to 2025. That's the rule. And now, if we want to change that at any time, then we can, forward, backward, eliminate it completely. But the rule, the motion would be dogs on leash, on pavement, on the island, October 1 through March 31.
But so just to be clear though, we're now going to have, if this were to pass, we would have a rule that says you can have dogs on the island, but they can't leave the paved path. But you've got people who can come onto the island, but they can leave the paved path.
Did you say paved?
Yes, I said paved.
Okay.
So, any chance you would modify that to take paved out?
Of course it would, but I don't think I'd get the votes.
You won't, I won't support that.
vote for that.
Nope.
Okay, so I guess that's the motion.
It's already October 17th, we don't even have, we have to adjust the signage. That's not going to happen right away, so I don't think October 1st is reasonable.
Can I say something? I just looked.
Actually, no, you can't.
No, you can't, I'm sorry.
Josh wanted to say something though.
But we're not in public. Oh, Josh. Sorry, apologies.
I think the paved path, just to clarify, the paved path is just the main loop roads, the driveways that get you out to each of the.
It's not it's not the loop around the, by where the eagle is.
It's not by the eagle.
Right, so that was the thing, is that time period is fine, it is acceptable on the paved paths. My concern for species, especially in areas of continuous woodland, would be that the access into those areas, and I would recommend that even just to, or advise that those areas, especially during the breeding season, starting in January, essentially, that signage be posted that eagles are nesting, don't access the area, for those reasons. So it goes humans and dogs in those areas. So, but I think that maintaining it outside in normally disturbed areas is on leash is reasonable.
Okay, so Mike made a motion.
Look what the cat dragged in.
Mike, you want to repeat your motion?
Yes, the motion currently on the table is to amend the access rules to allow for dogs on leash on pavement areas from October 1 through March 31. As not in a particular, not from 24 to 25, but those are the rules of any given year. Just to be clear, that's what this motion is saying.
Okay, understand. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mark seconds.
Thought you did,
Is
sorry.
Jim, are you part of this meeting?
Restated it.
I am part of the meeting.
Did you hear this?
Well, no, what was the original motion and what was the?
This is the original.
This is the original motion. We had conversation about straight, full access wherever humans can go, dogs can go for any period of time, and getting the general sense of the meeting, the people present. It was 4-4. Monica ran through a number of compromise scenarios. This is the one where there seemed to be
So what is the actual motion, the exact language?
The exact language is to amend the access rules to permit dogs on the island, on leash, on the paved areas from October 1 through March 31.
So that's the original motion that was made, is the first and the second?
Well, that's the compromise, because, I was saying, like, we've just loosened up the rules to let people off the paths, and now we're gonna fragment the rules to say dogs are only gonna be allowed on the path. Like, we're asking the community to follow the rules, but the rules are gonna be kind of, maybe not hard to understand, but you're gonna have to know the rules. Because you're gonna see plenty of people off the path. If you walk in there without, hearing that dogs are allowed, if you walk in and you see people on the lawn and on the polo field, and they're all playing around, and then you walk in, then, so I was trying to get support for not having to stick to the path, but.
Well, then so there's a motion and a second?
Actually, I
don't think there's a second.
Okay, so I would amend that motion to allow dogs on the island everywhere that people are allowed and not have a time limit.
Okay.
So, full year.
Okay, does Jim's motion have a second? Okay, so now we have we have a motion and an amendment, so let's vote on the amendment first. All in favor of Jim's amendment? Okay. Opposed? Okay, motion fails. Amendment fails. Okay, now we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of the motion?
I'd like to make another motion or amendment to the motion. And that would be to keep the dates, but allow them on the entire island.
Jim,
can we discuss?
Yeah, can we discuss?
Well, you need to.
I'll second that.
I'll second
That's how I
that.
seconded. Yep. So what you missed, Jim, and I think it needs to be noted, is we heard a very compelling presentation from Josh regarding the ecology and the different types of birds and different types of animals, and those dates were arrived at in part, and anyone on the committee correct me, in part in an effort to minimize the impact on those various species that were described. I can't
The migratory
recall.
season.
Migratory,
Okay.
right.
Is this a presentation that he gave?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's a presentation that he uploaded for the public before the meeting, so all of us could read it, study it, allow the public to be able to read it, study it, and react to it, or is this something that we just flashed up on the screen during the meeting?
Who's
Rebecca, you
offered
want to
during
speak
the
to
meeting?
how we are sharing information?
This is just a question, it's a yes or no. Was this a presentation that was shared ahead of time so the public could review it, so we could review it, or was this something that was just flashed up on the screen during the meeting?
Well, I wouldn't say it was flashed up on the screen, Jim. I would say that there was a very thorough presentation given by Josh that I think everybody learned a lot from.
Okay.
So I wouldn't insult what he did by saying it was flashed up on
No,
the
I
screen.
was just asking about the timing of when it was
Right.
made
It wasn't
available to this
flashed.
committee
Right.
and all the public.
Right,
And so it's just tonight.
right.
Okay.
Okay. So where are we? Do you have, what was your amendment?
I amended it to keep the time frame that had originally been proposed, but to allow them to be everywhere on the island where humans and residents are allowed.
So to Mark's point, the part of the presentation included the Eagle's Nest, which there's a federal requirement to restrict access within a certain amount of feet. So I think that's where some of the support for all over the island lost support.
And what time of year do you need to restrict resident access, people or dogs?
I think it
from?
applies to people too, which is not being discussed right now, but that's what I've heard from his presentation.
So does anyone suggest we don't let people on the island until we figure out how to keep them too close to the Eagle?
I think
that area.
I think that we came down to the March 31st being a fair date on the nesting. And so with what your amended motion is, saying, okay, that the dogs can go where people can go from the October 1st through March 31st, that's the motion I heard, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Mike, you seconded it, right?
The motion,
This-
I seconded
Jim's
his
second motion.
amendment for full access. I seconded it. Now we're discussing.
So the amended motion is basically
Okay, so you
during that
seconded
daytime,
this.
the
Okay.
entire island that where residents are allowed.
Okay.
Right.
All in favor of Jim's motion? Okay. All not in favor? Okay.
So now we're back to the
Now we're back
original
to the
motion
original.
without amendment, which I'll say again, dogs on the island unleashed from October 1st to March 31st on the pavement.
Same paved areas that.
Right, yeah, I
Pedestrian,
apologize.
human.
Yes.
Paved areas, yes.
Mark, you seconded
I
that.
seconded it.
All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Jim and Lori opposed.
Didn't see that coming.
Motion carries. Okay. All right, that's it for dogs for a while. Okay, next up is an update on the status of items that were recommended by the Rules and Access. And I want to thank Jeff and Lori for doing a whole lot of work on the signage. They worked on a spreadsheet, and I walked the property again today with Susan and with John and with Jen, and identified a couple of other things that should be worked on. Lori, you want to talk a little bit about, you have anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, Jeff and I walked the property very thoroughly with Tony Campanella, about 3 hours, I think, we're on property identifying all the areas that we thought we should have signage. Tony provided to us information that came from Kerma, our insurance representative, who had walked the island with Kate Bush and other town representatives a few months ago. He came back with some very specific recommendations regarding signage, and also referred us to a white paper that the state did about effective signage. So Jeff and I have used that as our guiding document in terms of coming up with the types of signage we need. While we had hoped to have kind of more what we consider friendlier signage, really the guidance really has to do with providing information using words like warning or caution to get a resident's or a visitor's attention, and then to give them information they need to make a decision in cases where you're saying, warning, steep drop off or something like that, as opposed to, there's ones that are just, you can't go here. So we've been working on that language. The document also very strongly recommends that town council reviews all of that, so I shared that information with Monica and John, and they'll arrange from that. We have some open questions to various subject matter experts on some of the different topics, to do with things like the shell fishing beds and what we can restrict or not, given that they're publicly designated. Just a few other things that we're trying to button up, and then Monica said she noticed a few more things today. So I think, Jeff, what was the count so far? It was like 33, 35
Well,
signs.
it depends. There are a couple of open questions. I think it is 31 to 33, and then 33 plus, depending on our decision on bike racks, because we don't want to have a bike parking sign if there's no safe place. And then depending on the vote we just took on what we need to do signage as far as dog waste disposal. So,
so there's a little bit more. So I think we were going to connect again, kind of finalize the list, the spreadsheet that will go to council for review. Then Tony, Cal, in terms of production, 3 to 5 weeks for that volume of signage?
well, yeah,
You
he said that stock
Yeah.
signage is past, custom signage, i.e. shellfish beds with maps.
Or just a specific
slower,
warning or whatever.
But a bulk order of, 30 signs, he wasn't quite sure what the time frame would be on that. I think we discussed, and maybe we'll discuss this in our follow-up meeting, if there's any of these that could be phased, but just in my reading of the TERMA recommendations and their report, I don't feel comfortable recommending any of the warning ones. We would phase in.
No, you know what, and I did, I spent about 3 hours today with Jen and Susan and John, and this safety is really, really important. So they did identify a few extra places that...
Which doesn't surprise me.
That will need some signage. and a few other activities. So I think that Tony will work as quickly as possible, or Ed in Tony's absence will work as quickly as possible. But I do think a lot of all of the safety signs have to be done. And I just want to be clear that I did ask specifically if we could proceed without these signs being in place, and the answer was no. The signs have to be up before the public is allowed to go on the property. So I'm sure that we will work. I will circle back, Jeff, with you and Lori, update you on what I learned this morning, and then we'll talk to Ed about how quickly we can get these. And then the idea was to bring the signs to the island and then have, instead of having DPW choose the specific locations, I'll ask for like 3 volunteers to come out there with us and help decide where to go.
Yeah. And we started researching distances. So far, the information I found, for instance, is that you need at least 5 feet from like where the hazard is.
Okay.
Before, like, the sign has to be at least 5 feet away from where the person would encounter the hazard. And in some cases more, depending on the type of hazard. So we have to do a little bit more work around that.
That's exactly
That
what
could
we need to
also
hear.
adjust, and it has to be readable for the normal person. The minimum letter size is 4 inches. But if there was something where we felt people needed to be warned 10 feet in advance, I'm not sure I can picture anything, but we need to think about that. You might have to think about bigger lettering and bigger signage. So it's kind of like the devil's in the details.
What was it? Why do we have to not allow people on until the signs are on? Like, who made that decision?
John.
Well, and I just think that the one thing is, I think that makes a lot of sense, obviously, because
Why bother
it's
putting the signs up?
It's safety.
Yeah.
But I think we're in the middle of our master planning process, and I think that a piece of that is wayfinding and signage.
Yes.
And we are going to come up with a brand and a way that our signs are going to look that's cohesive and inviting and comforting and all those words that you come up with, right? But like, then there's Vistaprint, okay? And like, we can get UV protected signage in like 3 days that is sticker onto a metal plate that we can use for the next 6 months to a year that will be perfectly legal, and we can literally have that within a week.
We'll look into that. We'll see. Good point. Okay, Ed, we talked about signage, and we talked about the other area that needs to be worked on. Did you have any other update for us?
No, I think I went over.
You went it all, right, okay. Okay. All right, so are we done with item 8? Are you all good? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, item 7. Item 8 is discuss and take action on the purchase of garbage cans and pet waste stations. And this, we were looking to make some decisions on this, and then...
I saw you send it out to the committee, but I didn't see that it went to Reed Hildebrandt, who is, again, with regard to the signage for these trash receptacles, should have input as to longevity of these types of items, their experience in other places, what color should they be, is a wood surrounding better than a metal one? I don't, any of that stuff, unless we intend to buy them twice, but...
Yeah, they're expensive. I did not know a garbage can could cost $620
They're expensive.
But I don't think them looking at it should take a day or two, they're not supposed to spend a month on it, but
Does that
at
take
least
a-
I want their input.
Does it take a vote on our, like, are we, when we say this stuff?
Yes, so what I would do is I would say, could we table this item until maybe our next meeting or our Zoom or whenever, and let Reed take a look at the material.
And that doesn't, that has no
It does for the dog
impact.
stuff.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't have any, it
Because
shouldn't
the
have
dogs
any.
are only going on the pavement areas anyway.
But
Their
the
dogs aren't part of the
And
expanded
there's
access.
not to stop us from putting
No.
ugly garbage cans out there
No, I'm not
right
talking
now
about the
until we
garbage
get the
cans,
right
I'm talking
ones,
about the
right?
waste bags
So-
and the waste.
Let's do it right.
I understand we're gonna do it right, but at the same time, like, the Board of Selectmen approved $25,000 for the purchase of, so does that, is that enough for, like, do we have to have a vote here, or do we have to just work with Ed and Tony and as a group to say, hey, do these look good? Or is it some, and I'm not, that's not a rhetorical question, I don't know the answer.
We would vote on this, we would vote on this, because, just because, then we have a decision made. So may I recommend that we table this until Reed takes a look at the information? Maybe they have some Tony sourced, but as I said to everyone here, if you don't like it, Google, you might find something else you like better, but we have experts here. So Becca, can you take a look at that? And
I think we also want to make sure they're animal proof.
Yeah, I think there's several factors, and I also think depending on who's providing the waste management, you might want them to be part of the city standard.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like, a typical solution is to, yeah, right. But a typical solution is to have them be what is familiar, because then all the practices are very smooth. So
Do we have excess recycling and garbage receptacles that are kind of taken out of use because we're at October 17th, and like that we could use for a few months if we needed to for?
I don't have them on my facilities. I can't speak for Parks and
I'm
Rec
not
and how
aware
they
that we
deal with
remove
their.
them, because the parks are active.
Yeah, mine are
all year.
down on the post road. I handle the ones on the post roads.
And do we cross-pollinate with the schools at all? Because like that whole thing.
I don't know. I'd be
And all their
surprised.
fields are pretty much lightly used until April 1st now.
Is the view that we can't let people go elsewhere on the island without garbage cans?
No.
No, I think we basically are saying pick up after yourself, but we're trying to provide garbage cans because we're now saying you can bring food and you can sit and have a picnic, but, I mean, it's carry in,
Trying to avoid a
carry
mess.
out, but we're trying to avoid a mess. And so it's like, yes, could we put some garbage cans temporarily around until these ones that we're ordering come in? We could. Like Monica said, let's do it right, though, and I
Yeah,
agree.
I don't think the garbage cans are a pinch point. So my recommendation is we table the item and we let Reed Hildebrand look into this with their wayfinding group or whoever their gurus are that take a look at this, and we circle back on this at our next meeting.
I don't think, just last comment, I don't think that it's, just thought that just popped into my head is we've got porta potties, okay? We didn't stop people from coming onto the island because we couldn't build permanent, great, beautiful bathrooms. So let's not do it with garbage and recycling. If we have to put next to the porta potties some garbage and recycling cans that are functional, but maybe not as beautiful as we'd like for the end game, let's do it. And so that we don't have trash problems and enforcement issues with people doing things that we don't want them to.
Okay. But we don't, Bruce, we don't just have spare $720 garbage cans.
Well, they don't have to be 720, I'll
Well, they
donate
need to-
some.
But they need to perform to a certain standard, so.
Yeah,
Okay, so, you know what, this isn't a pinch point as far as timing goes, so may I have a second on tabling this and letting Becca take a shot? Lori seconds, all in favor? Okay, all opposed?
I just couldn't decide.
It's fine.
I'm sorry, you can put me in the press.
It passed.
It's not personal.
It
I
passed.
know, I was just thinking, with confidence. I was just thinking, do we have any garbage cans around somewhere?
That's all I'm saying.
Okay, no,
So, I'm sorry.
let's table.
It's table, move on.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're tabling it?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody opposed to tabling it? Okay, carries, all right. All right, next item is, okay, discussion and possible vote on the effective date of the revised rules. So, I was instructed by the selectman's office that the signage has to be completed before the rules can be changed. So, again, this is another one where we don't know how fast we can do this. And we're going to have another meeting, hopefully November 7th. I would ask all of you at this time to take a look at your calendars and get back to me. Would you prefer 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock? And would you prefer in-person or not, or remote? Please remember that the remote is a little tricky, as we have experienced this evening. And if we could avoid a remote, I would like to do that, because that was pretty uncomfortable. But, so, one option, I don't think we're ready to vote on an effective date, because we don't actually have an effective date. So,
Can we vote on an effective date with an understanding that if Parks and Rec deems the property not ready, then they can...
It's not Parks and Rec.
No, it's not Parks and Rec. It's us.
It's us.
I know, but if we say November 1st, right? If we vote November 1st is the date that it will open, unless there are unforeseen circumstances that arise.
Right.
Then we believe that we could get our signage in place between now and November 1st. If we do, and people don't have a problem, and we think that all those nows are checked for the signage, the holes are filled, the various things, it moves forward and it opens. And that there's, or it comes out and we send a note out that says the property's just not ready.
okay,
Can we
here's
just say that it's open once the 4 or 5 milestones of what needs to get done are accomplished?
Yes.
Sounds like, yeah, can we tie it to an
Does it need
event?
a date? Can't you just say it opens when these 5 things are done?
And the signage is installed.
Right.
This has to go back to the Board of Selectmen for them to vote on the rules again, so you just tell the Board of Selectmen we voted to open it up with the expanded rules, which they may or may not pass these revised rules when it goes to their meeting, as soon as these 5 things are accomplished.
But they approved already that decision being made by us, by this board.
But now we
The
just,
opening.
but now I thought
Yeah,
we
but
all
we're amending-
recommended to
yeah.
We're sending this
send
back
back another
to
set of
them.
revised
So-
rules to the Board of Selectmen, which they now need to vote on again.
Right.
But
I
we're
think
not
that's-
revising the opening date. Okay.
We are.
we don't have an effective date.
Right.
The effective date can't be the date at which this stuff is accomplished.
But Dan is right. The Board of Selectmen voted to allow Great Island Advisory Committee to pick the effective date.
Right.
So it wouldn't go back to the board. So
I'm just saying the date, there's 2 different things. The rule change, I think, that we all just passed, that allows dogs on certain parts of the island,
Right.
that rule change needs to go back to your board, right?
But that stands
Right.
alone as a decision.
Second thing is, they charged us to determine an opening date, so couldn't we say the effectiveness of the new rules, whether or not the Board of Selectmen amends them, is the date at which these handful of things are finished?
Right. And the other thing we'd have to
That's what
include
we
at the
said
Board of
last
Selectmen is because you change, we added also, just to remember, we added the no smoking, the no vaping thing. So there are 2 regs that we've changed tonight that this Board of Selectmen will have to vote on. They had said the Selectmen had said to this committee, have at it, open it when you guys determine that the benchmarks have been met. So it doesn't have to go back to the board
Right,
for the
right.
effective date of opening.
Right. So
But
I
it-
think Jim's
yeah, I think Jim's
idea
correct.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's our responsibility. I don't really want to put a date on, because if we have to change things, let's not do that. But I like this idea, or the other option is we call it Zoom, and when these things are done, we have a vote. But I think.
Does it even require a vote to say, okay,
Yes.
are we voting that these things are done? Or are we, because we've already voted that we're going to open it when, we sent it to the Board of Selectmen. They sent it back and said, you guys decide when to open it.
Right.
So as the chairman of the committee, can you make a decision that the items that were on the list have been completed, and now you send out a press release that says the property is open? Or,
What's
what's requiring the vote?
Bruce, we're saying The date at which the new rules will become effective.
As determined by
is
the
date
chairman
at
of
which
the
These
committee.
5 things are completed.
Exactly, and Monica can decide that.
Right.
Why do we have to wait till November 7th? Like, if that's done on October 27th, and Monica's satisfied,
Right.
can't Monica just read it and be like, okay, check, 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 check?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm okay with this. Here's the press release that's been written, waiting to go out. I'm comfortable sending out the press release now. And people, and then the local, news organizations can pick it up, and we can get it out to the community that the decision has been made, the property's ready, so
Because
have
we're
at
just
it.
saying, we're voting that when these 5 conditions are met, then the property can be open. So it doesn't require us to come back and vote to say, oh, they have been met. Whether they've been met is self-evident, so then you
Okay,
can
okay.
make that
All right,
determination.
so Jim, make a motion that the effective date will be when all of the items that are on our to-do list are done, including the signage put up.
So I'll make a motion that the effective date of the new rules, as we propose to the Board of Selectmen, whether or not those are amended further by the Board of Selectmen, become effective when all the items that were identified tonight have been completed.
I don't think it's tied to the new rules at all. The new rule only has to do with the dog thing.
But just, the rules are the rules of the Board of Selectmen approve, right?
Right.
Yes.
They approved some rules. We said they're going to become effective once all these things are done. We're sending new rules to them, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll second that motion.
Dan, did you get that?
No, I didn't get all the wording, he said no.
Jim will repeat it.
I make a motion to make the revised rules of access for Great Island become effective once all of the items that were identified tonight that need to be accomplished have been completed.
Mike was the second.
Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, thank you. Okay. Discussion of guidelines for responding to inquiries about potential free events on Great Island. So we've been approached by a variety of people. It could be the plein air, or it could be hosting a bird tour, or it could be Boy Scouts campouts, or fire or police, that kind of thing. And I guess, we need to have a response on these, and one response could be that we are, we're going to create a list of provisions, and if they meet all of these, we go along with it. Or there could be to the other side where we wait until the vision and master plan is completed, and then we have a touchstone for how we, the criteria that we approve these different events. So I open it up to discussion.
I feel like we ought to set up a clear but comprehensive process in setting standards, and we can't do that tonight, obviously, but I think we ought to create a blueprint for these early applicants, if you will, that's, consistent with some of the things that Reed Hildebrand said earlier this evening, but also is consistent with our desire to allow access and perhaps lower impact events. And I think we have to sit together, maybe create a subcommittee to maybe create that blueprint so the process can be set. Here's the application, here's the requirements, submit it, and then I guess like we approve it, or then maybe then the Board of Selectmen approves it. But I mean, I think there are some things that we have to do and be thoughtful about it before we can really address these folks. Because I think some of those ideas are terrific, like the art thing and the Boy Scouts, campaign, who's like more concerned about ecology than Scouts, right? So I think we should be doing that. We just have to create a thoughtful blueprint for allowing that access.
I agree with that, Mike. Anything we develop now, and we do need a process, so that there can be consistency around how these different events, because we're going to see the spectrum, we've already seen the spectrum, but anything we develop is based on the information we have to date. And our vision is yet to be developed. And so it's going to be, in my mind, like a living document until we have a vision, at which point we can finalize whatever that process is, consistent with the vision that we all adopt.
And I would ask the question, if we ever get to the point where we're approving these things, is how do you disapprove an event request after you've approved two others, you know? Our committee doesn't like, pick something, you know, a Halloween parade or something, so.
Yeah. What do you think, Becca?
I appreciate the statements just made. I do think the issue of precedent and fairness is a big one for these kinds of things. So I think there's a lot to be said about what both Mike and Mark said, which is if we can come up with a process, which I feel like the process could be begun, like in terms of what are all the pieces that go into that, and then the vision is actually rapidly coming to you. I'm just saying, like, the vision phase is not actually a long phase. So if you begin figuring out what your process is in the committee that Mike is advising, it seems to me that those two things could end up basically arriving in hand for you.
Is this something you would help us with?
I'm happy to advise. I don't want to be, I feel like we do have a lot that we're doing already on your behalf, so I want to be careful about overextending because we want to deliver you your vision.
But perhaps they could advise, you know, if we set up some objective standards, then we could ask the question, well, do you think it's be too impactful if we allowed an event every weekend, or you know, every other, other weekend, that kind of load management, if you will, maybe you could advise on that, and then we could do the rest of the objective standards.
I would love to do this in partnership with you, because personally, I feel like this is exactly what we're trying to develop for the scenarios, right? Which is like, yes, does this community want an event once a month? Or, and I mean, I think there's lots of factors, but there's a lot of noise and light and traffic when you have events. And so modulating all of those impacts is something that people are going to be very, very interested in. So I think it behooves both us at Retail Brand and you as a committee to do this sort of in lockstep.
What about precedents?
I think the precedent is very important. I think Dan's point that precedent is critical, because I think once it's a little bit like the question, once you start to open things up, it's very hard to take them back.
So I meant precedents with similar properties. Is this something that you see happening?
I think, yes, I mean, I think most properties have a application process. There's a timeline. Sometimes there's a fee. There's a set of procedures that are part of that. There's a committee that's tasked with oversight.
I was going to say, we also have to think about the actual administration, because, for instance, all of the events that are held at parks, and there are many, there's a formal application, it has to be reviewed for completeness, we have to get insurance certificates if people want to serve alcohol, there's other things, so we have to know who is actually going to handle that and make sure it's done right. So
yeah, but that's
no, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, that's
I'm just saying, though, but because I don't see that being something the committee would.
No, but Lori, I'm glad that you're raising this, because it's one of the reasons I wanted to actually to have Ben here tonight, which is that I think as you start to expand access, the administrative burden on this committee or on the town is going to increase rapidly, and the enforcement pressure is going to increase rapidly, and it is very important that as you are taking on these increased access responsibilities, that there are provisions for the responsible oversight and management of them. And so I think
right,
that just, and their costs. I mean, I just think like
right.
There's a reason why Craig was here so much this evening, because your public works group is already under enormous pressure, right? You don't have a dog warden. You are a community that is lean to begin with, and we are going to be putting more and more pressure as we increase these things. So to me, one of the reasons I wanted Ben to say is like some temporary structure, whether or not you want it to be you guys or somebody else, but I think that I guess I would add, Mike, to what you were saying, is I think starting to think about what is in the next year and the next 2 years, who is putting the resources in terms of time, energy, and cost for what the town wants to do on the island.
Yeah, because all these events, it's not just financial, it's a lot of manpower.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing that you just said. I think that, and I think that's going to resonate with the community. I think that, look at the people that come and spend 2-3 hours sitting here listening to these meetings. I know that many more watch back the video, and so, we're lucky to be a community that has quite a bit of means within the four walls of this community. So I don't think that it's a huge ask to think that we could go and find funding for a Great Island enforcement officer and for a Great Island executive director that deals with the things that we want, because we don't want Great Island to be a free-for-all. That's one thing I think we all, I think I speak for all of us, that we all have great intentions for what we want Great Island to be. And this town is great, and it's been that way because we've been people who care about this town and protect it. We protect it pretty closely. So I think that, if we can say, okay, we're going to we've decided to let dogs on a leash, but we need to make sure that there's some way of enforcing that if people decide not to do that, that they get their hand slapped.
Well, how do we do that elsewhere in town? Shouldn't we do it the same way?
That's a great point, but can I just point out that it's almost 11 o'clock and that we have people here that might want to get moving. So can we move on to the next item on the agenda?
Sure.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from September 30th. So Jim sent around a document, so I'm going to highlight what he said. We are going to, well, first of all, we're going to add Mark Adeletta to attendance. Oh, no, Mark, you said you
I
weren't
was
there.
not at the meeting.
Okay,
Yes.
so Mark Adeletta is not there. Sorry, Mark.
No worries.
And Tony Campanella is actually not ex officio, so he's going to stay down in staff. We had so committee will follow the format for recording public comment that's used by the Board of Selectmen, and that includes the speaker's names and addresses, and if they spoke in support or in opposition of an item. So for these minutes, we don't have addresses, so what I would suggest is that we just say the names and what they spoke to. So I would also correct Miss Natalie Tallis, it's 2 L's there. And we're going to correct item 6, we're going to spell my name correctly. And then on item 6, Mr. Palin moved an amendment to Ms. Boer's motion to amend that would remove sections 5, little I from the rules and access requirements. And we're going to, following a brief discussion, Mr. Palin withdrew his motion to amend. And we are going to remove the footnote about public comment because it's not an agenda, it's just minutes. So are there any other corrections, additions, deletions?
So how are we listing public comment? So we're going to summarize?
No.
What we,
It's just going to be spoke in favor, spoke
Name and
against.
address.
Yeah.
Are you even going to that, spoke in favor?
No,
Yes.
I don't think you should do it
I
in
don't think we
favor
can
of.
do that.
Because
No,
then you're
Name and
gonna-
address.
we're not, no. We're
You're gonna say
not
they talk to dogs or they talk to trees, right?
so can I say,
Yes.
are we including a summary of what they said, whether it was for or against?
No.
No.
Okay, so it's simply
Name and address.
No,
And if you want
and
to,
I'm sorry, Board of Selectmen does say if they spoke in support or in opposition. So we
Of
will
what?
include that. in their public comment,
Of dogs or trees or whatever the topic was.
or whatever.
But not a reach
So
out,
for
just a
each
positive or
public
negative.
comment, will we be saying this person spoke in favor of X, or they spoke against Y?
Right.
I think that's a
I don't feel
slippery
comfortable
slope. I
actually
think,
making-
like, you know, Astrid Peters came and spoke here tonight. How would you classify that in a sentence, what she said? She didn't come here talking about dogs or about bikes or
Okay.
anything like that.
Okay, you know what, this, I got this from the selectman's office, so I'm going to confirm with them that this is correct. So may I have a motion to table the approval of the minutes at this time?
Do we have to table it or just not move it?
Just not move it.
No, it's
Just
not gonna
move it.
move
No,
it.
it's-
We haven't
we
moved
do,
it yet, have
because
we?
it's on
Oh,
the
yeah,
agenda. So
that's
I
right.
need a motion to table. Mike moves, who seconds? Lori seconds. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, thank you. Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn? Mark moves, everybody seconds. Gonna give it-
My hand goes up.
That's fine. Gonna give it to Kip on that one.
I got a 4-inch
Mark,
apron.
Mark, can I see